Chapter 196, Ripples of the Soul. It had all been a bit too much recently. Ashlock was inherently lazy as a human and especially now as a magical tree. He was perfectly content with watching the seasons pass him by as time moved at a different pace. But recent events had led him to force himself to stay awake into the night and even fight cultivators above his strength while fighting off exhaustion. With the mystic realm in just over a week, he had a short window to relax, sleep, and even contemplate more profound concepts such as new spatial techniques, while in the quiet of his own mind. Something he hadn't been able to do for almost a year now, so it was a nice change of pace. Ashlock had decided not to use his hibernate skill during this time despite the added boost it would provide to his cultivation because it would only deactivate if a strong cultivator appeared, and he wanted to be sure the sect could function without his micromanagement. He would awaken for an hour at a time to check on things. Sometimes, he would see Stella training Elaine void mind in swordsmanship and chi control in preparation for the mystic realm. Other times, he saw Diana and Stella chatting on the bench under his canopy and watching the sunset. Maple would be sleeping on Stella's head as always, and Kaida would be happily hissing on Diana's lap. Ashlock didn't care to eavesdrop on their conversations, so he would check up on the Whitestone Palace during these moments. Douglas was hard at work with a team of rogue Earth Affinity cultivators he had hired with spirit stones, and the Whitestone Palace was being rebuilt at an impressive pace. Also, within a matter of days, the ints had fully healed, and with them standing guard around the mountain range, he felt safer ignoring the world around him and having long periods of sleep and deep conversations with the heavens. He had even told Chaos to shadow Stella wherever she went just in case Nox showed up and tried to take the other earring or kill her for some reason. With winter on the horizon and the knowledge that days would become shorter and reduce his conscious hours, Ashlock was glad to see that so long as something massive wasn't going down, the Ashfolin sect could operate without his constant input. Idolatry Daily Sign-In System. Day, 3549. Daily Credit, 7. Sacrifice Credit, 80. Sign-In. Ashlock was awoken from his slumber by a familiar notification. Dismissing it, he briefly checked outside his trunk, and seeing that everyone was sleeping or meditating under the rising sun, he retreated within and continued his theorizing for spatial lock. The deeper he pondered it, the more depth the technique contained, and he knew once he cracked this one, the other spatial concepts in the Azure Clan book would be easier to learn. Occasionally, he had asked Stella to let him practice his idea on her, such as trapping her in a bubble of his spatial chi or trying to rewrite the anchors of her portals to make her appear elsewhere. Yet, neither gave him the impression of a lock but rather a suppression or trick. He wanted a spatial cultivator to stand before him and understand they could not run no matter what. That they were sitting ducks within his domain. And as it turned out, robbing another spatial cultivator of their control over their own affinity was a trickier affair than he had first thought. A few hours passed quickly as he cycled his meditation technique Transpiration of Heaven and Chaos and tried to reach enlightenment by asking the heavens for answers. As the heavens answered his call, the empty darkness of consciousness shifted. He was now a tree in the center of a tremendous purple-tinted lake that was perfectly tranquil. Small ripples began to spread out from his body across the lake, and he noticed something interesting in the distance. It was a purple being with a vaguely humanoid form that strode toward him through the knee-deep lake, sending ripples as it went. Ashlock was confused. Due to his deep connection to heaven and the chaos of hell, they could give him visions and insights into concepts he asked of them. But even with all his advantages over the common cultivator, he still had to decipher the deeper meaning of these visions. He began to feel nervous. The purple being didn't look friendly as it began to pick up the pace and started charging toward him. Ashlock wanted to run away or stop the being in its tracks, but he could do neither as he could not create portals or manifest his vines within his mind, so he had no option but to wait there helplessly. It was vexing and frustrating, making him realize that his only defense was offense. If he had a problem in the real world, his solution was to kill it either by vines, swords, the void, or even his ints and allies before the threat reached him. None of that worked here, but heaven wouldn't show him a vision to make him feel helpless and nothing else. There had to be a deeper meaning to this illusion within his mind. Focus. What is heaven trying to enlighten me about? Ashlock analyzed the inbound purple creature. He tried to push it back with his presence, but all that did was send out more ripples that impacted the purple monster and made the lake choppy and chaotic. Let's see, the ripples clearly indicate the area of my control as the more I push out my presence, the further they travel. Likewise, this purple being also has its own ripples that spread out at a lower frequency. Is that because it's weaker than me? No, wait. I am focusing on the wrong thing. Its strength doesn't matter, only the ripples. Ashlock sent out faster ripples, pushing the waves emanating from the purple being closer to its body. Still, just like when he tried to disrupt Stella's portals during their duel in the Pocket Realm, and there was a bubble of chi firmly in her control about 2 meters around her body, no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't disrupt the ripples closest to the purple being. Hold on, what if I matched the purple monster's wavelength? What if instead of fighting it, I tried to resonate with its ripples and become one with them? Ashlock decided that was a good idea, so he relaxed his presence and concentrated on matching the speed and size of the purple monster's ripples. Soon enough, the waves traveling out from his trunk across the purple lake became synchronized with the purple monster and entered a dance where Ashlock's ripples almost appeared like they popped up during the lulls of the purple monster. A moment passed, and the purple monster ceased its charge through the lake toward Ashlock and began to melt back into the water as if robbed of its strength. It tried to spread out its presence to draw in more power to fuel its body, but it couldn't. All the lake's ripples, including those coming out of its body, belonged to Ashlock. He was in total control. The purple monster then seemed to sense its demise, manifested a portal, and crawled away. The vision faded from Ashlock's mind, and the purple lake vanished to give way to the usual endless darkness. A whisper of heaven blew by with a single phrase, chi resonance. Is that the name of this technique? Ashlock mused, the ability to match my chi signature to that of another and rob them of their connection to the surroundings. The heavens did not answer, but he suspected he was right. Although I suspect there are still some more steps to achieving a genuine spatial lock since the purple monster was able to escape my control through a portal, Ashlock hummed to himself as he tried to think of the next step. However, his thoughts were broken by the outline of a purple hand appearing at the edge of his consciousness and a sudden unease from his root network. Something nearby was bringing concern to his offspring. Tree, are you asleep? Stella's voice rang through his mind. She hasn't bothered me all week, and my offspring are usually quiet when I am resting, so something must be up. Ashlock expanded his spiritual sight to the outside world and saw Stella leaning against his trunk with her hand and the midday sun overhead. Yes, I am awake, Stella. Ashlock spoke into Stella's mind with his abyssal whisper skill. I just managed to uncover the first stage of the spatial lock technique, so I was rather distracted. Did something happen? Stella nodded. Elder Brent has returned, and there are serious injuries. Ow. They should have only ventured into the outskirts of the wilderness, so there shouldn't be any strong monsters there. Ashlock cursed as his vision blurred to the white stone palace. Elder Brent felt a knot in his stomach as he climbed the steps up the mountain. 10 youngsters from his family trudged behind him, and in the silence between them, a depressing atmosphere hung over the group. A few glanced briefly at the boy clutching a missing arm in the middle of the group, but they had the decency to not stare. It's my fault Kyle lost his arm. Elder Brent lamented as he clenched his teeth and prepared for the horrific face of the boy's mother and the rage of the Grand Elder. It had all happened so fast and in an area where there should have been nothing of significant danger that he was caught off guard. He closed his eyes and shoved the scene out of his mind. Recalling the event could wait for the ears of the Grand Elder, so for now, he would enjoy this moment of peace and quiet. If not for the youngsters, who all had significant injuries, the group could ascend the mountain much faster, but this slower mortal pace gave Elder Brent time to take in the atmosphere of the mountain range that he had been away from for some time now. Besides the unusual amount of activity he could sense up ahead near the palace, 2 other overwhelming presences dominated the mountain. Glancing to the south, where Red Vine Peak towered far higher than his family's peak, he saw a colossal being of what appeared to be white marble standing beyond the mist enshrouding the giant demonic tree and gazing out into the wilderness with its lighting eyes as if searching for something. The rock below Elder Brent's feet trembled as the other dominating presence, a titan of black wood that towered over the mountain peak's scarlet trees, turned to face him with its lilac eyes of blazing soul fire as if judging him. Elder Brent gulped as he looked away. Did the immortal put his creations on watch duty? I rarely see them being displayed so openly like that. Behind him was Darklight City, but it was a fair distance away, and the intense chi environment due to all the demonic trees would make it impossible for anyone under the Star Core realm to spread their spiritual sight this far. Elder Brent, I see you have returned from your trip out into the wilderness in search of corpses for the Ash-Fallen Sect's immortal. A voice the Elder knew all too well boomed down the steps and made his body shiver. Grand Elder, long time no see. Elder Brent replied as he took the final steps and made it to the gate that led into the white stone palace courtyard. I have indeed returned, but there were some complications. The Grand Elder's booming voice and Elder Brent's arrival had caused all the youngsters cultivating in the courtyard to stand and look at him with curiosity. However, their eyes went wide, and they began to gossip with one another as the injured redclothes he was supposed to have protected flanked him. Kyle. A voice screamed, and the youngsters were pushed aside as Amber dashed forward. What happened to you? Elder Brent felt his blood freeze as Kyle began sobbing into Amber's embrace behind him. Sister, we were ambushed, Kyle said between tears, and his voice was muffled. I lost my arm to the monster, and now I will never be able to wield a sword again. It's okay, Amber repeated as she rubbed his head. It's all going to be okay, just trust me. Elder Brent, what is the meaning of this? The Grand Elder said coldly. Calming his breathing, Elder Brent met his family head's eyes and said clearly, we headed north and failed to locate any monsters, so I made the decision to make a detour and hunt in the wilderness to the east of here. Everything was going fine for a few days, and we managed to hunt many Chi Realm and Soul Fire beasts. However, we were ambushed when we stopped for rest one night after fighting for multiple days straight and exhausting our Chi in what I thought was a safe area. I laid down a detection array and took the first watch, but then the screams came. What monster attacked you? The Grand Elder asked. A Lurk Shadow variant, Elder Brent replied, and a strong one too. It was at the peak of the Soul Fire realm. If not for the array, I fear it would have been able to target me first and then slaughter the rest. Kyle sadly took the first attack, losing his arm and alerting the rest of us. After giving the name of the monster, Elder Brent was relieved to see the rage in the Grand Elder's eyes soften. After all, they were known as one of the most troublesome foes when crossing the wilderness. Especially alone. Elder Brent recalled what he had read regarding Lurk Shadows when he prepared for his first ever outing into the wilderness as a teenager. If I remember correctly, Lurk Shadows are usually small creatures, standing around 5 feet tall when upright. They boast a sleek, slender frame covered in dark, scale-like feathers that shimmer to match the environment. This unique feathering allows them to blend seamlessly with their surroundings, be it the dark of night or the shadows of dense foliage. Their eyes are usually large, luminescent, and pale, almost resembling twin moons, but they can contract them to mere slits, becoming nearly invisible when they stalk their prey. They thrive in dense forests, swamps, and other locations where shadows are abundant. They build nests in the heart of darkness, often in deep caves or hollowed-out trees. Worst of all, unlike other monsters, they are silent and patient. They will wait for days for the best opportunity to strike, as once they are revealed to their foe, they often lack the combat capabilities to win one-on-one. While the Grand Elder was mulling over his thoughts, a few other Redclaws, along with Amber, fed healing pills and tended to the injuries of the youngsters. Grand Elder, is there something you can do for me? Kyle begged as he trudged over and collapsed to his knees before the family head. I'll do anything. I don't want to be useless to the family. Please. Bring my arm back. Elder Brent clenched his hand. No amount of healing pills would bring Kyle's arm back. He would have to live his life as a cripple. I'm sorry, there's nothing I can do. The Grand Elder sighed and closed his eyes. All hope left Kyle's face as the teen stared wide-eyed at the floor and trembled. But that doesn't mean all hope is lost. The Grand Elder said as a massive portal manifested in the middle of the courtyard. A blonde girl wearing a cloth mask that covered her lower face skipped through the portal and glanced around. A fluffy white twirl seemed to sleep on her head, and a beautiful ornate sword in a black leather sheath was hanging casually from the drawstring around her waist. Mistress Stella, the Grand Elder gave the woman a deep bow. There has been an incident. Is there anything within the Immortal's power that could possibly? Yeah, don't worry about it. Stella waved the Grand Elder off. It's just a flesh wound. He will be fine. She laughed and patted the man on the shoulder. All this stress will give you wrinkles, old man. The portal behind Stella rippled as a sudden blinding light overcame the courtyard as if the sun had descended, and Elder Brent had to blink a few times, but even as his sight returned, he couldn't believe his eyes. Soul, go heal the child for me, Stella commanded casually, and the 3-meter-tall abomination of gray wood stepped past its master and paused before the kneeling child. Kyle squinted into the light as one of the 8 palms facing the floating sun reached in, grabbed a wisp of light, and brought it down just before his head. You're too short. Stand up and embrace the light, Stella called out, it will heal you. Elder Brent held his breath as Kyle gulped and stood, allowing the palm to press the wisp of light into his forehead. A golden glow flowed down from his head like a waterfall and bathed Kyle in its mesmerizing light. His bloodied stump began to wiggle as muscle strands emerged like frenzied worms and began to twist and reform into an arm. Kyle understandably stumbled back from Soul and screamed in fear, but Amber was there to hold and calm him down. "Kyle, relax. I told you it would be okay," Amber reassured him. "You can trust Mistress Stella." A tense moment passed, and Kyle eventually stopped screaming into Amber's hand over his mouth. His arm was back, and he was staring at it in shock. "See?" Stella said as she walked closer. "Told you it was nothing but a flesh wound." She then glared at Soul. "Don't just stand there being useless. Go heal the others." The abomination wandered off, and Elder Brent almost laughed, seeing all the injured youngsters eagerly line up to receive the light. "My arm. It's really back," Kyle muttered, still in total shock. Stella reached down and forcefully opened Kyle's palm. "The immortal told me to give these spicy fire fruits to those hunting for corpses." She placed the orange fruit in his hand and then closed his fingers around it. "I personally found it way too spicy, but I think you might like it." "Thank you," Kyle said, a bit confused. Stella smiled behind the mask as she got up and turned to Elder Brent. "Now that is sorted, we need to have a talk." Chapter 197, Mystic Realm Discussion. Ashlock instructed Stella to summon all of the Redclaw elders into the White Stone Palace's meeting room. He hadn't used Abyssal Whispers on all of the elders yet, nor did he wish to needlessly waste Mind Fortress pills, so he had Stella speak for him. It was almost nostalgic this way, and he felt the elders respected Stella more now than they did in the past, so he was happy to let her handle the flow of discussion for the most part. Even though the elders were trustworthy, Stella kept her cloth mask on, likely to hide her facial expression and to calm her nerves. "Stella, are you sure you don't want Diana to handle this meeting?" Ashlock asked within her mind. "No, she is busy teaching Elaine stealth techniques, and I can handle the Redclaw elders just fine," Stella replied mentally. "Also, this is a good chance for me to catch up with them before the Mystic Realm." The door to the meeting room opened, and the last elder arrived. "I hope you dragged me from the forge for a good reason," Elder Mo grumbled and then sat down on a sofa beside Elder Margaret, who quickly caught the old man up on the situation. "You did what?" Elder Mo shouted at Elder Brent. "I always knew you were a useless fool." "Stella, you can begin the meeting," Ashlock said with a sigh, yet the elders kept arguing for a while. Clearly, there was some lifelong beef between them. "Ahem," Stella cleared her throat to draw everyone's attention, finally silencing the fighting. "To start, much like Elder Mo, the Immortal is concerned and displeased with Elder Brent and his expedition management," Stella said as she lounged on the sofa and looked across the tea table at Elder Brent, who was paler than usual. Elder Brent glared at Elder Mo. "Mistress, I apologize for not meeting his and the Immortal's expectations. I alone was tasked with the youngster's safety, and I accept full responsibility for the disaster that took place under my supervision," Elder Brent said sincerely and gave a short bow to Stella. "I want to know why it happened," Ashlock said in Stella's mind. They shouldn't have gone that far or encountered anything outside Elder Brent's capabilities. So why were there so many injuries? Stella repeated what Ashlock said but in her own words. Elder Brent sighed. "My negligence and inexperience certainly played a role, but there were far more monsters than I expected. I have hunted around those parts recently, and it was never like this." The number of monsters had tripled, and they were frenzied, Elder Brent explained. "Also, the youngsters have weakened from their prime a year ago. The fire chi around this mountain peak is only adequate at best and detrimental at worst, and there was little fire chi out in the wilderness for us to replenish our spent chi from." "Elder Brent," the Grand Elder snapped, "are you pushing the blame of your failure onto the Immortal and this nurturing environment he has provided us?" "He's not entirely wrong, though," Elder Mo butted in. "For those of us that have been fortunate enough to venture into the Mystic Realm, cultivation has become a breeze. But for the youngsters, the only place with enough chi to consider cultivating is out in the courtyard, all huddled up together, giving them no space to practice any new techniques. Furthermore, whenever someone tries to leave the palace, they risk disturbing the youngsters' cultivation. Stella, take charge of the conversation and tell them about my evolved offspring, the groves, and the new spicy fire fruit," Ashlock said, "then ask Elder Brent about the frenzied monsters." "Okay, let's calm down," Stella said and was somewhat surprised at how her voice silenced everyone. All the elders turned to look at her. She took a deep breath and continued, yes, the environment around here is not perfect for fire chi cultivators, but the surrounding scarlet forest has recently evolved. All of the demonic trees across the mountain range are now in the soul fire realm, and the immortal has created groves of similar affinity trees to make perfect areas for cultivators of various affinities to meditate. Just travel the winding path through the mountain range, and you will find them. I did feel more chi in the air recently during my walks, but I always steered clear of the scarlet forest and the area around Red Vine Peak. Elder Mo leaned back in his sofa and rubbed his chin. But if there really are these groves, that's a step in the right direction. It will give the youngsters some peace and quiet away from here with all the construction work and mortal servants wandering around. Stella nodded and then leaned over the tea table. There are also these fruits packed with fire chi that the immortal grew. Her spatial ring flashed with power as she mentally shifted through all the items stowed inside and found the mountains of fruit she had nabbed from Ashlock's branches. Grabbing the ones she wanted, a small pile of orange fruits materialized on the table. Take one and try it, Stella smiled behind her cloth mask as all the elders reached forward and took one. Soon, their faces were pure bliss as they bit into the fruits. Any traces of anger or pent-up frustration vanished as the elders cycled the dense fire chi around their bodies. These fruits cost the immortal's chi to make, so he is unwilling to grow them by the hundreds or thousands and give them out for little reason, Stella quickly explained before they demanded more. The plan was for these spicy fire fruits to be given as a reward to those from the sect that ventured out into the wilderness to get the immortal corpses or caught the immortal's attention. Basically, they are supposed to be rewards. Elder Margaret chuckled, I wouldn't mind going out into the wilderness if I could have one of these delicious fruits daily. Same, Elder Mo muttered, would the immortal give me another if I enchanted a sword for him? Would you? Stella whispered to Ashlock in her mind. Maybe. The fruits aren't that chi-intensive to grow. I just don't want to grow hundreds of them. Even so, I don't know if I want him to put his spirit in my swords. Ashlock replied, and Stella saw the fog at the edge of her consciousness swirl around with unease. Weren't you going to give him a sword to enchant to test his capabilities? He told me to wait after the mystic realm so he could reach Star Core, Stella mentally replied. Actually, now that I think about it, we have a lot of people on the cusp of ascending to Star Core, right? Diana and Elder Mo are in the peak stage, and Elder Margaret and Brent are at the 8th stage. Indeed, this will be a pivotal mystic realm visit. If we are lucky, our sect's combat power might skyrocket. Ashlock replied with 1,000 cheerful voices. I am especially curious about what Neptune wishes to show Diana in the mystic realm. Something to do with her bloodline, perhaps. Stella suggested. I would hope so, as getting any information about bloodlines down here seems impossible. Ashlock sighed, I just want Diana to be able to maintain control of herself while shifting between or staying in her demon form. I saw her strength during the merchant fight. Despite being an entire realm below, she could fend off Lucius momentarily. Just imagine what she can do at the Star Core realm. Stella felt a smile tugging at the corner of her lips and a warm feeling hearing Ashlock praise Diana. She used to be jealous of Diana's bloodline, but now she was just grateful it had given her the strength to survive being stomped on by Lucius. Also, my bloodline is more powerful than I first thought. Stella mulled. It hasn't even fully awakened yet. I can tell this is just the start. I will be the strongest once I uncover its secrets and learn how to wield its strength fully. Diana can come in a close second, I suppose. I'll allow that. What nonsense are you daydreaming about? Ashlock chuckled, get on with the questions. Ask Elder Brent about the frenzied monsters. Oh, Elder Brent, Stella cursed as she stumbled a little over her words, but the elders didn't seem fazed as they were in a good mood from the fruits. Yes, mistress. Elder Brent said respectfully. You mentioned earlier there were 3 times more monsters than you anticipated, and they were all in a frenzy. Could you elaborate on that? Certainly. The monsters all seemed to be charging from the northeast as if they were fleeing from something, Elder Brent explained as he motioned out their path on the tea table with his finger. It could be that a powerful monster has made the northeastern area its home and forced the weaker ones out, or. He fell silent, and so did all the other elders. Or. Stella pressed. It's the start of the cataclysmic beast tide, the Grand Elder murmured. Silence returned. According to the latest estimations from the Nitros family that were issued some time ago, the peak of the beast tide should hit this area in over 3 years. Elder Margaret, who looked many decades younger than the other elders due to the truffle, drummed her fingers on the armrest of the sofa. Although it is possible we are witnessing the earliest waves of the beast tide, I still doubt it, as those usually come within a year of the peak. What do you mean by peak? Stella asked. The beast tide comes in waves, with the weakest at the start and the strongest at the peak, Elder Margaret explained. The peak is usually the wave right before the strongest monster makes its move. This monster at the peak is the one the Blood Lotus sect's patriarch fears the most, and if speculations are to be believed, it might be in the peak of the nascent soul realm. So I have 3 years to reach that level of power. Ashlock's voice rang in Stella's mind. Doable, but as my cultivation progresses into higher realms, so will the corpses I need to consume to ascend further. There's a good chance I will have to rely on the monsters from the beast tide waves to reach that realm of power in time. You could always have a feast on the bodies of the noble families, Stella mentally replied. I'm sure some roasted void mind leg or a skyrend pie could be delicious for your cultivation. Perhaps. Ashlock's insidious tone made Stella shudder as the fog surrounding her consciousness flashed dark red, and she saw visions of twisted roots rising up and. Stella downed another mind fortress pill and distracted herself. Thank you for the explanation, Elder Margaret. Of course, as I previously mentioned, the more likely cause is that a strong monster has made the Northeast its territory, Elder Brent reiterated. I think we should investigate. Not until after the Mystic Realm, Ashlock said. I can't send my ints or anyone strong enough to investigate right now. The Immortal says that investigation can wait until after the Mystic Realm, Stella told the room. Makes sense, the Grand Elder nodded. On that note, who will be entering the Mystic Realm this time? Stella looked up at the ceiling as she felt Ashlock deep in thought. All of the Redclaw Elders and Amber, as she is also a few stages below Star Core. Also, everyone from the Ashfallen sect, including Elaine and Douglas, will go. However, Larry and the Ints will remain behind to protect the sect. Now the question is, should we allow the younger Redclaws in? Stella relayed the question, and the room fell into a brief silence as the elders mulled over their thoughts. I would say no, the Grand Elder sighed. They aren't ready physically and emotionally to brave the Mystic Realm, even if the Pocket Realms adapt to their cultivation level. What if they stumble upon an inheritance? Will they have the maturity to let another seize the reward, or will they butcher each other for it? Elder Brent nodded. I agree. I admit I was negligent, but their fighting standards are below par. Their training has been neglected recently, and they needed more outings into the wilderness to prepare themselves. However, Elder Margaret said, we need to consider if this rise in monsters in the wilderness is due to the beast tide coming sooner and harder than expected. If so, we need to act now. They may be too weak to contribute much with us around, but in a war against endless waves of beasts, we need as many people as possible to fight in shifts. We should increase their cultivation as soon as possible. Some may die, Elder Brent said as he shook his head. One Soulfire Lurk Shadow variant could injure 10 youngsters while I tried to kill it. Their battle sense against something strong was hopeless. It would have gone better if they grouped up and didn't run in different directions. I propose we spend this Mystic Realm on increasing our personal power to a satisfactory level, Elder Mo declared. Then, when we return, I can make everyone spirit fire weapons, and we can take groups of youngsters to the wilderness and train them up against the beast hordes while also investigating the source of their frenzied state. After a month of training and eating truffles and whatnot that I hope the Immortal will graciously provide, they should be combat ready for the next Mystic Realm and only require some supervision from us to minimize casualties. The Grand Elder hummed in agreement. I like this plan. Even if it is the beast tide, a month's delay won't change much in the grand scheme of things, especially with these new spicy fire fruits and chi-rich groves for the youngsters to cultivate in. Then it's decided, and this meeting is concluded, Ashlock decreed in Stella's mind. Get the corpses off Elder Brent and then return to Red Vine Peak. I have already brought Soul back. Stella stood and clapped her hands. Very well, elders, that is what we will do. Elder Brent, hand me the corpses you gathered for the Immortal, and then I will be on my way. Elder Brent obliged by pulling free a silver ring from his finger and pushing it across the table. Stella picked it up, quickly shattered the spiritual lock, delved inside the pocket space, and confirmed a mountain of Chi Realm and Soul Fire corpses. These will serve as good snacks for Tree. Stella thought gleefully as she withdrew her consciousness from the spatial ring. Oh, Immortal, if you are still listening, the Grand Elder said to the ceiling, Douglas requested that you populate the center of each courtyard in the new white stone pavilion with a demonic tree so it may provide the Redclaws with fire chi as they practice and cultivate. White stone pavilion. I will go take a look, Ashlock said, and then Stella felt him withdraw from her mind, and his intense focus shifted elsewhere. He said he will look into it, Stella said casually as she snapped her fingers, and a portal manifested. I will be off now. See you all in 3 days for the Mystic Realm. Chapter 198, Sir Underlord. Ashlock left the meeting behind, and with Eye of the Tree God active, he gazed at the red-closed mountain peak from high above. Dominating much of the south side of the flattened mountain peak and facing Red Vine Peak was the White Stone Palace in all its glory. Back on Earth, it would have been a home for royalty, with grand marble pillars supporting the 10-story structure that could house thousands of servants. Attached to the palace's west side was a courtyard facing the cursed forest and Darklight City, with room for hundreds of people to gather without issue. Compared to the royal palaces from Earth, all it lacked were fountains and perfectly maintained gardens. But that issue was somewhat rectified by the literal miles of scarlet forest surrounding the palace in all directions and the many miles of meadows and lush green forests populated by the mortals before the wall to the eastern wilderness. Ashlock had watched this grand palace of white stone being built over many months with the wealth and manpower of the now eradicated Evergreen and Winterwrath noble families during his youth. So it made sense for the rebuilt half, by Douglas and his rag-tag group of hired cultivators in only a week, to be referred to as the White Stone Pavilion as the contrast between the two was too great to refer to them with the same name. Or at least that had been the case a few days ago. What the hell is going on? This place looked like a disorganized construction site a few days ago. But this. Ashlock was baffled. He had been checking in on the build's progress during breaks from his meditation. He had been impressed with the speed of construction but estimated it wouldn't be finished before the Mystic Realm opened. Yet everything had improved drastically in such a short space of time. It was basically complete. The flattened mountain peak had been further extended, so the new white stone pavilion covered far more space than the palace ever had and now wrapped around the north and east sides of the palace. It was massive and looked like a town with its own intricate road system leading between blocks of one-story tall pavilions, all centered around empty courtyards. The pavilions were built from simple stone but painted white to match the palace lording over them. It was awe-inspiring, and Ashlock suspected he had found the source of this sudden development. In the very middle of all these courtyards was a large square that looked like it could hold a marketplace, and standing proudly on a pillar of stone in the center, puffing on what looked to be a smoking pipe and wearing a tailor-fit beige suit, was none other than Douglas. Why does he look like a mafia boss? Ashlock mused as he inspected Douglas further. The black cloak of minor concealment he had worn in the past casually draped from his shoulders and his golden brown hair was slicked back with gel or something rather than left alone, giving him a dignified look. 20 people, a surprising mixture of muscular men and women who all looked like they mined during the day and entered arm wrestling contests on the weekends, surrounded the pillar that Douglas stood upon in a circle. They were all on one knee and looking up as if he were some god. Sir Underlord, we have recovered our strength. A woman with more muscles than seemed humanly possible called up. We are ready to lend it any time. Douglas took a puff from his pipe, which glowed a pale blue. Is he smoking spirit stones? Ashlock had no idea what he was even witnessing anymore. It had only been at most 3 days since he last checked on Douglas, and all he had seen back then was Douglas getting frustrated and fighting with the rogues he hired over his vision and their speed. Good, this task is almost over, and I can finally be rid of you useless bastards, Douglas grumbled as he fished a high-grade spirit stone from his trouser pocket and shoved it into the pipe. He then raised his finger to its base, and a small light brown flame sprung to life. With the pipe still in his mouth, he continued muttering, "Could have been done days ago without your useless inputs dragging me down. Sir Underlord, we apologize for our incompetence." A man with gray hair who appeared to be in his early 50s but was likely far older spoke up. "Please let us continue working for you." "You mean keeping paying you an exorbitant amount?" Douglas snorted in amusement as he took a final puff and deposited the pipe into his spatial ring. "All you lot are good for is being my chi source, so shut up and sit there." Douglas then rubbed his temples and grumbled to himself, "What a load of fucking leeches. 100 spirit stones a day. For what? I should have done it all myself with these artifacts and the spirit stones I am paying these useless fuckers." Douglas sighed as his spatial ring flashed again, and a strange walking stick made from what appeared to be a brown gemstone stalactite appeared. Douglas clenched the ornate golden handle in his massive hand and closed his eyes. "All right, you lot, give me your chi," Douglas shouted. "Yes, Sir Underlord." The rogues shouted with varying degrees of enthusiasm as they placed their hands on the stone column that Douglas stood on, which began to glow in a silvery light. Oh. It's a chi gathering formation. Ashlock realized as he watched streams of earth chi shoot up the runic lines engraved into the column and then went up through Douglas's gemstone walking stick and finally into his hand. Douglas's body became engulfed in a column of brown flames, and Ashlock was baffled at how he was surviving, having so much chi pumped into him. Is it something to do with huffing spirit stones? Ashlock wondered, or will he spend the chi quickly enough? With his eyes still closed, the ground trembled as Douglas raised his hand, and Ashlock saw pillars of stone rising from the ground to the north in the distance. Flying over, Ashlock witnessed a grand stone archway easily 10 people high emerge from the ground and cast a shadow over the many pavilions. On the archway, the words White Stone Peak were engraved. Yet it didn't end there. A stone staircase began to form down the side of the mountain and weaving between the demonic trees. It got 1,000 meters down the mountain before the rumbling stopped, and Ashlock saw Douglas lower his hand and open his eyes. He hid it well, but Ashlock could see the deep exhaustion overcome him. But he was far better off than the others. All the rogue cultivators around the pillar had collapsed to the ground or were leaning against the stone pillar. Some were passed out, while others had staggered to the floor and struggled to bring out pipes and insert spirit stones. Is this how they can quickly recover their chi? Ashlock pondered. Douglas replaced the walking stick with his pipe and shakily loaded up another high-grade spirit stone into it and brought it to his lips. TSK, if only Jeb was here, I wouldn't have to do this shit, Douglas cursed as he lit the pipe with his soul fire and took a puff. Chi was drawn from the spirit stone and into Douglas's lungs. After a few puffs, the high-grade spirit stone turned a dull silver, and Douglas tipped the pipe over, kicked the dull rock as if it were trash off the side of his pillar, and loaded another. He went through 10 high-grade spirit stones before he looked slightly better. After finishing the 10th one, he sat down and began to cultivate. Ah, so the spirit stones contain chi without an affinity, and Douglas now has to use his soul core to convert the raging chi within his body into usable earth chi, Ashlock concluded, but he could have achieved the same thing by just absorbing the ambient chi in the air. Although it would have been slower, I suppose. Since it was boring to watch people cultivate, Ashlock changed his area of interest to the forest of his offspring and tried to find fire chi affinity trees that were too closely grouped and competing too much for sunlight. Ah, here we go. After searching for a few minutes, Ashlock found one of his offspring growing from a depression in the mountain face, getting surpassed by his siblings and living in the shade of their canopies. Buddy, would you like to be moved? Ashlock asked the tree, and he felt a wave of agreement flow through the root network. I will take that as a yes. Okay, wait there 1 second, Ashlock said and then felt silly. Where would the tree run off to? That aside, he went and found Titus, who was wandering along the mountain range. Titus, come help me uproot some trees. A portal manifested, and Titus naturally followed his master's orders and strode through the provided portal. Pick up that one in the middle, Ashlock instructed the ent that loomed over the group of trees. Titus carefully bent down and pulled the demonic tree free from the rock. Ashlock then suspended the demonic tree in the air with telekinesis and directed Titus to the next tree he wanted to be uprooted. Hours went by, and now there were over 1,000 trees suspended in the air around White Stone Peak under the evening sunlight. Having learned from the last time that he had so carelessly floated trees around and ended up with a void mind elder inside him, Ashlock waited until the rogue cultivators headed home to Darklight City for the day. Once the last one had made it down the mountain, Ashlock mentally moved all the trees at once up the mountainside and cast a large shadow over the whole White Stone Peak. Douglas stood upon his pillar of stone in the empty marketplace with a grin as 1,000 trees floated overhead and began to descend toward empty courtyards. Taking a final few puffs of the high-grade spirit stone pipe, Douglas closed his eyes and spread out his arms. The pillar pulsed with power as the ground in the many courtyards split open and revealed holes big enough for the trees and their roots. Over 100 Redclaw youths rushed out of the White Stone Palace and through the pavilion-lined streets, pointing and cheering at the floating trees as Ashlock carefully lowered them into their new homes. Now, among the sea of white buildings, there were splashes of scarlet that rustled in the mountain breeze. It was a breathtaking sight in the warm evening sunlight that tinted everything in an orange hue. The pillar Douglas stood upon stopped glowing with power, and the weary man dropped his arms as the ground stopped trembling. His long work day was finished, and the White Stone Peak was complete. All that was left to do were the finishing touches and for Ashlock to relink and fuse his roots with his offspring overnight. Ashlock watched Douglas as he stood on the pillar gazing at the sunset and felt almost proud of the guy. Perhaps it was the new look or how the man had carried himself while dealing with the rogue cultivators today. But Ashlock felt his opinion of Douglas change. Douglas was no longer in his mind a loudmouth, argumentative guy hired to do the dirty work and manual labor who was weak in cultivation and replaceable with any other rogue cultivator Mr. Choi could find. Douglas may have only been with the Ashfolin sect for a short while, but Ashlock now saw him as a leader, a pillar of the sect, just like Stella or Diana. And a leader needs a team. Ashlock mused. I should get him a legion of Earth Affinity ints or perhaps allocate him funds to hire as many rogue cultivators under him as he wishes. Actually, you know what would make him really happy? Ashlock's vision blurred back to Red Vine Peak, and he dug into his inventory piled high with random stuff from the Void Mind Elder and other places. Digging deep, he searched for something suitable to reward Douglas with. Oh, this is perfect. Ashlock freed a ruthless-looking mace. It was made of some dark steel-looking metal. The shaft was around a meter long and ended in a round ball covered in spikes. With that secured, he also picked out some nice-looking rings, a chain, and truffles he had grown and stowed away. Putting all the items inside a silver spatial ring, Ashlock glanced around Red Vine Peak and located Stella, who was lounging under his canopy on the bench and reading a book. Stella, can you give this ring to Elaine and tell her to give it to Douglas and say it's from me as a reward? Ashlock asked, oh, and add that I am looking to get him ints, and he can hire rogue cultivators if he wishes. All for that annoying guy. Stella put the book aside, rolled off the bench, and onto her feet. Fine, give it to me. Ashlock floated the ring over, and then Stella teleported beside Elaine, who was in the middle of training with Diana. Stella grabbed her shoulder and pulled her aside just in time to dodge Diana's sword swing. Phew, thank you, Stella, you really saved me there. Elaine chuckled wearily as she stabilized herself and then wiped the sweat from her brow with her arm. So what's up? This spatial ring is for Douglas, and Ash wants you to deliver it to him personally as a reward for his hard work. Oh, and also, Ash says he will make him more earth-ins or fund any rogue cultivators he wants to hire. Oh, how romantic, Diana said flatly, and Elaine's ears went red as she accepted the ring, to deliver something to him personally. I suspect you are part of the reward. Diana added with a chuckle. Stella looked between them in confusion. How is that romantic? She is just delivering a spatial ring to Douglas. So young. So innocent. Diana shook her head sadly and turned to leave, or maybe just clueless. Ah, whatever, I will go and cultivate until Elaine returns. Don't just leave. Explain it to me. Stella grumbled and then turned to Elaine, hoping she would answer. Deciding to save Elaine from having to explain anything to Stella, Ashlock created a portal that led straight to Douglas on the stone pillar. Sorry, Stella, got to go. Elaine seized the opportunity to escape and gave Stella an awkward wave as she jumped through the portal. Douglas felt a ripple of spatial chi behind him, so with his guard up, he spun around. Who goes there, Ag? He stumbled back a step as a cheerful Elaine embraced him in a tight hug. Her flowery perfume assaulted his nose, and he was stunned. What is she doing here? Elaine. He awkwardly returned the hug. What are you doing here? Weren't you training with Diana? He felt the bundle of hair buried in his chest look up at him. I was. But I came to see you, silly. She stuck out her tongue at him and pushed herself out of his embrace. Here, she said, presenting him with a silver spatial ring. Douglas raised a brow. This is. Taking the ring, he inserted his chi, looked inside, and gasped. Is this all for me? They are rewards from the patriarch for your hard work. Elaine said excitedly, unaware of his turbulent thoughts. He also said he will make you lots of ints and fund any rogue cultivators you wish to hire. Douglas withdrew the mace from the spatial ring, and as he held the cold metal in his hand, his heart had never felt so warm and happy. A feeling he had never felt in his life manifested in his soul. Acceptance. Are you okay? Elaine asked worriedly, but Douglas just hugged her tight as a tear trickled down his cheek, and he watched the distant sunset. Chapter 199, Chi Resonance. Ashlock left Douglas and Elaine to have their moment together and returned to Red Vine Peak, where Stella was still sulking about nobody telling her why it was romantic. I sometimes forget how clueless Stella is about topics that don't include killing people or making pills. Ashlock sighed. It's not her fault though. She had nobody to raise her, and she spent all her days alone on a mountain peak talking to a tree. So, it makes sense that she is clueless about healthy human relationships as she wasn't exposed to any until recently. That aside, Ashlock felt the setting sun on his leaves and the slowly dropping temperature signifying the coming of night. Before I sleep, I should get those corpses off of Stella and maybe test chi resonance on her to see how it works. Stella, busy sulking and trudging back to the bench, perked up when Ashlock's presence re-entered her mind. Her spatial ring flashed, and she popped another Mind Fortress pill. Is it really fine for you to eat so many of those pills? Ashlock asked, won't your body build up a resistance to their effect, or maybe you will get cavities? Stella tilted her head, cavities. What are those? Ashlock was confused but realized he had never seen Stella brush her teeth once. Yet she had perfect pearly white teeth. You know when teeth rot from eating too many sugary things. Stella blinked, oh. Isn't that something only mortals have to deal with due to their inferior bodies? Stella pulled on her cheeks to show off her teeth and grinned. Not cavities. Ashlock was once again reminded that in this world, cultivators were basically a different species from the millions of mortals that inhabited Darklight City, only a few miles away. You don't get sick either, do you? Ashlock said. Or need to eat and sleep. Nope, those are issues for the mortals, Stella snorted. My star core produces all the fuel my body needs to function, and how could I get sick with all this chi running through my flesh? She looked like any other teenage girl from Earth, so it was easy for Ashlock to forget she was basically a demigod with how she could live for 1,000+ years without aging that much and never growing tired or sick. As someone originally from Earth, it was hard for Ashlock to wrap his head around sometimes, but he definitely felt his view of the world and the passage of time distorts since becoming a magical man-eating tree. So, why are you always lazing around on the bench if you don't need to sleep? Ashlock asked, half joking. The body and mind are two separate things. My body may be able to ignore the need for mortal things like sleep, but my mind is much the same as when I was a mortal in the chi realm. Stella shrugged, I get bored sometimes and occasionally feel lazy. I have never really enjoyed cultivating all day, so I waste my time lounging on the bench reading a book or napping. Stella then summoned her sword to her hand and sliced through the air, however. Right now, I feel very motivated to refine my swordsmanship. Good for you, but would you mind handing me those corpses Elder Brent gave you first? Ashlock asked, I crave a light snack before I slumber. TSK and you accuse me of eating too many pills? Stella rolled her eyes but smiled. Here you go, you glutton. A pile of corpses appeared near Ashlock's roots that seemed to immediately earn the interest of his pets. Kaida uncoiled himself from around Diana, who was busy cultivating, slithered across the mountain peak, and beelined for the corpses with his cute pink tongue flickering as if tasting the air. Larry was a little more subtle as he crawled down from the demonic tree that Ashlock had placed next to the giant hole through the mountain peak and swiftly made his way over. Ashlock could only sigh at the sight of his two pets patiently waiting beside the pile of corpses and giving him pleading eyes. Not only are sacrificial credits becoming harder to get with my rising cultivation as I have to keep seeking out stronger corpses, but there seem to be more mouths to feed and skills eager to consume my hard-earned credits lately. Ashlock grumbled as he summoned a thorn-covered vine that emerged from a crack in the stone. It's fine, though. Kaida and Larry are part of my strength, and I'm curious to see how powerful Kaida will become when he reaches be great. Ashlock mused, I should send Kaida into the mystic realm, but should he go alone or alongside someone? I guess I can decide that in the coming days. Ashlock felt hunger rise within him as blood from the corpses leaked through the grass and stone and down into his roots, so his trunk split open to reveal his demonic eye, and he gazed down at the pile. You two just wait there a moment. Let me sort through these corpses first. Ashlock used the spike on the end of the vine to skewer the corpses one by one and then bring them in front of his eye for inspection. Weak, not even in the soul fire realm. Ashlock chucked the first corpse into a pile near Kaida. Better, but this one has formed dragon marrow. Ashlock placed that corpse near Larry. A similar pattern of putting any chi realm monsters near Kaida and those with dragon marrow near Larry continued until Ashlock finally found a corpse worth devouring. This must be that peak Soulfire Realm Lurk Shadow variant which took Kyle's arm and forced Elder Brent to return with so many injured youths. Ashlock moved that corpse near his trunk and would eat it later. He could revive it as an ent, but since it wasn't in the Star Core realm and he already had Chaos, which was a superior version and a true apex predator capable of one-shotting a peak Star Core merchant with life-saving artifacts, he didn't see the point and would rather have the credits. After all, this Lurk Shadow variant had failed to kill a single Redclaw despite getting the jump on them. It's a shame that none of the Soul Fire Realm corpses I have given Larry so far were Earth Chi. Some of the Chi Realm corpses were. But there's no way I am giving Douglas a Chi Realm and it would be basically useless. Ashlock continued skewering the corpses and dumping them into piles, and after a while, he now had 3 distinct groups. Larry, you can eat those corpses, but leave the bones behind as they contain dragon marrow, a useful alchemy ingredient, Ashlock said through their mental link. As you wish, Master, Larry replied in his gruff accent. I graciously accept this food and will honor you as I eat it. No need to go that far, Larry, Ashlock chuckled, but consider this payment for the fact you will guard me while the others are in the mystic realm. It did bring Ashlock a level of concern with him sending so many of his strongest people into the mystic realm. Especially with the strange behavior of the monsters recently to the east, the chance of Nox coming back with friends, and the fact he didn't know the status of the war between the Void Mind and Skyrend family. Wait, didn't Nox flee to the east? There's no way she has anything to do with the sudden frenzy of the monsters. Right? Ashlock didn't enjoy this feeling of threats breathing down his non-existent neck, but he also needed his allies to grow in power and fast. Telling them not to enter when others did and causing their cultivation to fall behind wouldn't be fair. Larry was an exception, as he was already so strong that the others were playing catch-up to him. Master, it is my honor to stay by your side. Larry gave a spider equivalent of a bow and then began to carefully pick at his food and leave the bones behind. Something Ashlock couldn't do as his black vines devoured everything, including flesh, bones, weapons, armor, and even spatial rings. Ashlock watched Larry eat for a moment and decided everything would be fine. He just needed to keep his guard up. Kaida, you can eat all of those Chi Realm corpses to your heart's content. They would likely give me a single credit each, whereas they will bring you closer to that B-grade evolution. Kaida hissed happily and then unhinged his jaw. Since he was the size of a massive python, he could gulp down multiple corpses without changing his body other than making him a bit wider. Why do you two reflect your master so much? Stella laughed from the side as she swung her sword around and watched Kaida and Larry devour their portions with glee. The ground rumbled slightly as Ashlock pulled on the root network for nutrients, and many more black thorn-covered vines sprung from gaps in the rock, and began to coil around his pile of soul fire corpses. The hissing sound of melting flesh and the occasional cracking bone filled the courtyard as they were reduced to nothing within minutes. Plus 37 SC. Plus 48 SC. Plus 51 SC. Plus 45 SC. Plus 59 SC. Plus 24 SC. Plus 63 SC. Plus 42 SC. Ashlock felt a slight tingle as he absorbed the chi from the corpses. It left him feeling unsatisfied, as if he had been starving and gotten a single slice of bread that hardly sated him for but a moment. Compared to when I devoured Nox's shadow that tasted delicious and filled my body with chi, this just hardly feels like a meal. Ashlock sighed as he summoned his system. Idolatry Daily Sign-In System. Day, 3549. Daily Credit, 7. Sacrifice Credit, 449. Sign in. So that pile of corpses gave me less than 400 credits as I already had 80 credits, which is a bit less than what Nox's shadow gave me. So why did it feel so immensely less satisfying? Ashlock looked within himself and soon found the answer. His system may have rewarded him with credits for his troubles of eating weak corpses, but his star core had hardly grown from the chi. The difference between star core and soul fire really is that of an entire realm. It's like eating a single grape instead of a whole apple. Damn, I'm hungry. All I can think of is food metaphors. Still hungry, tree. Stella said with a hint of amusement. I can feel your presence restlessly looking at Larry and Kaida's piles. Both Larry and Kaida reacted differently to Stella's tease. Kaida hissed aggressively and coiled his tail protectively around his food. Meanwhile, Larry seemed concerned. Master, please eat my share if you desire. This humble servant can go and source my own food. Stella is messing around, ignore her, Ashlock sighed. He really had no desire to steal food from his pets. With his meal complete, Ashlock's star core was now mostly filled, and he had a nice stockpile of credits to use if anything were to happen while everyone was in the mystic realm. Nearly 500 credits gives me enough to use dimensional overlap to summon a pocket realm to fight within and plenty left over for consuming abyss. It's the perfect amount where I'm not tempted to sign in for a gotcha pull but enough to fight with. Ashlock pondered, although I would like some more credits, but how can I get them in such a short time? There's nothing much out there in the wilderness within my route range, and if I send Larry or my ints to go hunting, they might not return in time for the opening of the Mystic Realm. There was also the risk that if he sent a single ent to investigate the area with frenzied monsters, he would lose that ent forever and maybe aggro the beast if a Peak Star Core or even Nascent Soul Realm monster made that area its territory. Decisions. Ashlock mulled over his options. With Larry and Soul at his side, he should be able to defeat anything. If he can't with those two alone while fighting around his trunk, then the fact the others were here wouldn't make a difference. Bucket, let's focus on working out the spatial lock technique, as that will really help me. Ashlock used abyssal whispers again on Stella and saw her pause mid-swing and swivel her head to look at him in confusion. Yes, Tree. Stella mentally replied to his presence in her mind. I want to practice a new spatial technique on you that I have been working on. Would that be okay? Depends, Stella replied as she rested the sword on her shoulder. What does this technique do? It's called spatial lock. It was in that Azure Clan book you showed me. Ashlock replied, I believe I have discovered the first layer to it but need to test it on a spatial cultivator such as yourself. Can't you use Titus for that? Stella tilted her head. I guess. No, actually, I can't. Ashlock dismissed that idea. Titus can't speak to provide feedback. It would be like putting a rock in a cage and asking if it liked it in there. Fine, whatever. Stella shrugged. I will provide the feedback you desire. Thanks, Ashlock replied. Just tell me if you feel anything, and keep trying to make portals around yourself. Okay, Stella snapped her fingers, and portals appeared around her. Ashlock shifted his demonic eye and concentrated on Stella. His usual spirit sight could not see those ripples in the ambient chi that he needed to resonate with for the spatial lock to work. Due to his mutual understanding built up with heaven over his past meditation sessions, when he mentally thought about activating his new chi resonance technique, his vision of the world shifted, and he could now see the ripples coming from himself, Kaida, Larry, and Stella. Ashlock saw that his ripples were large like tsunamis of power gushing out of his trunk and traveling down the mountain for many miles. Meanwhile, Stella's were rapid and fizzled out after a few meters. This might be a bit harder than I thought. Ashlock wrestled with his star core and tried to force it to let out less powerful and smaller waves at a rate similar to Stella's. To his surprise, it worked. His star core dimmed, the tsunamis ceased, and intense but faster waves of chi rippled out. Stella's face instantly shifted to one of concern as the portals around her began to wobble. Talk to me, Stella. What is happening? I'm losing control of my portals. She shouted aloud. Her voice was panicked, and Ashlock saw the ripples of her soul speed up. Moments later, she regained control of her portals. The purple monster in my vision couldn't alter their soul ripples to fight back. Ashlock readjusted his chi resonance and once again seized control of the portals. This game of cat and mouse continued for a while. Stella kept speeding up the ripples of her soul, and Ashlock would match it in kind within a few seconds. Eventually, Stella collapsed to the ground with sweat dripping from her nose, and her breathing was erratic. The ripples of her soul were all over the place and no longer consistent, so she couldn't maintain any control of the surrounding portals. What did you do to me? Stella cursed to the ground, earning the attention of Larry, who had finished his meal. There's no need to be alarmed. All I did was match my soul's influence on the surroundings to yours. Ashlock mused, it seems that because I have a higher cultivation stage and, therefore, finer control, I won out in the end. After a few seconds of recovery, Stella staggered to her feet, slowed down the ripples, and once again regained control. I see, but other than making my portals a bit unstable for a moment, I wouldn't call this a spatial lock. I agree. There is another stage to this technique, I'm sure of it. Once I resonate with someone's soul ripples, I should be able to stop them from casting any more techniques. Ashlock sighed, but I feel that the next step is far away. Master, try me, Larry said as he stood between him and Stella. His many scarlet eyes looked into his without fear. Ashlock somehow felt pressured by looking at Larry through his demonic eye. He knew Larry was one of his strongest members, but was he really touching the realm of Nascent Soul? Or was he perhaps already in that realm to pressure him like this? Fine, this will be a good test even though you don't have any movement techniques I know of, Ashlock said. To his understanding, spatial lock was designed to stop any type of movement technique, but maybe it was far more than that. Why should it only work on movement techniques? Why shouldn't he be able to use chi resonance to disrupt a weaker foe's techniques and basically cripple them? Larry's presence began to rapidly increase as the halo of ash orbiting his crown of horns began to spin faster and faster. Soon, massive waves of chi rivaling Ashlocks began to ripple out and down the mountain peak. Ashlock had a sneaking suspicion he was going to lose. Chapter 200, Mystic Tree. Ashlock found himself facing off against Larry in a battle of the soul. Unlike Stella, whose chi ripples went faster and faster until they couldn't anymore, Larry went for progressively larger and less frequent waves to fight back against Ashlock's chi resonance. Within a minute of their battle, Ashlock learned that the size of the ripples indicated someone's overall ability to exert their presence on the surroundings. Since Larry had a higher cultivation stage, his waves reached higher. But Ashlock's ripples went further into the distance due to his large body spreading for miles. But neither the wave's affinity, height, or distance mattered for chi resonance. The focus was on matching the frequency. Whoever had a greater range of frequencies they could reach would win, and Ashlock soon found out Larry was the clear winner as he could not force his soul to let out the waves any slower to match Larry. "You win," Ashlock eventually muttered as he felt his star core shudder and refuse his command to make the waves travel out slower. Soon, Larry's soul ripples were overwhelming his own, and Ashlock would have been on the receiving end of a spatial lock if Larry knew the technique and was doing any of this on purpose. "Master, you will defeat me in all aspects soon enough." Larry relaxed his soul, and the ashen crown orbiting his horn slowed down. "I am simply a humble servant to protect you until you far surpass me." "Yeah, I appreciate it. Thank you for entertaining my test." Ashlock yawned. The sun was setting, and he felt the need for a deep sleep after being put in his place by his pet. "Stella," Ashlock spoke in the girl's mind once he had recovered. "Yes, Tree." Stella blinked at him. "I will enter sleep and meditation until the mystic realm opens in 3 days. Make sure everyone is here and ready to enter on the dawn of the 3rd day before I usually awaken," Ashlock said. Since he planned to try and enter the mystic realm through his offspring via progeny dominion, he didn't want to waste a single minute as it had a limited timer of a single day from sunrise to sunset. "Sure thing," Stella smiled. "Have a good sleep, Tree." "Thanks. I will." Idolatry Daily Sign-In System. Day 3552. Daily Credit 10. Sacrifice Credit 449. Sign in. Ashlock spent the next 3 days trying to figure out the next step of Spatial Lock but had little luck. He knew it involved seizing complete control over someone once their chi ripples matched to stop them from subconsciously changing the frequency of their soul ripples, but he was unsure how to achieve that. "Ashlock the Immortal, good morning." Stella's voice rang in his mind. "Since when did she call me that?" "I guess it's fine, as it's about time all of the Red Clothes learned of my great name." Ashlock emerged from his dazed slumber and felt his biology kick into gear as the warm morning sunlight landed on his leaves. Rustling off the cold and morning dew, he looked around with spiritual sight and saw Stella standing before his trunk. Quickly checking his system, he confirmed today was the day. Mystic Realm S unlocked. "Morning Stella, is everyone ready?" Ashlock asked with abyssal whispers. "I gathered everyone as you requested." Stella gestured behind her to Ashlock's first offspring, which he had replanted in the center of the mountain peak, where the mystic realm had manifested the last few times. "They have been waiting here since last night and have all taken the necessary truffles and pills to have the most productive delve into the mystic realm." Around his first offspring was everyone they had approved for this dive into the mystic realm. All of the Redclaw elders were present alongside Amber as she was the most promising youth in the Redclaw family and had been before. Apart from them, Ashlock was drawn to Douglas. "What happened to Douglas?" Ashlock whispered. "He looks so different." Stella smiled wearily. "He ate the skin improvement truffle." Ashlock had never seen the man look so full of life. If before he looked like a ruffian who had lived a hard life of labor but had a sharp face and muscles, he now looked like a professional bodybuilder and model that he expected to make motivational videos while walking around a mansion. "I should give everyone else those skin improvement truffles," Ashlock mused. "I just keep forgetting to grow more and give them out." Elaine was standing beside Douglas and seemed to be barely containing her excitement as she bobbed her head up and down and kept looking around like a kid waiting in line at an amusement park. Diana seemed much calmer on the surface than the others at first glance. But she stared straight ahead at the demonic tree, balling her fists and biting her lip. She was clearly stressed or nervous about something. Understandable, considering Neptune said she had something to show Diana, and this should be the Mystic Realm visit where she finally ascends to Star Core Realm and will then only be a stage or two behind Stella. Ashlock knew there was a bit of competition between the two, perhaps more on Stella's side than Diana's, but Diana was clearly more hardworking, especially after being almost killed by Lucius over a week ago. Being stamped to near death and treated like an ant likely left a lasting impact and a burning desire to acquire power. Kaida was coiled nearby and hissing softly at Diana. "Don't try and go with Diana," Ashlock told Kaida. "You can evolve and progress your cultivation by eating like me, but I think you will benefit more if you go into a pocket realm filled with ink chi and try to cultivate for once." Kaida lowered his head and hissed sadly at the floor. "Don't mope around like that. You are a C-grade summon, and it's time you learn to fight independently. You will be fine, and I hope you will return with a B-grade evolution waiting for me." Ashlock reassured the snake. He wanted Kaida to grow in cultivation, and he felt Diana needed some alone time with Neptune. "You can always stay back here with me and Larry," Ashlock added, and the snake's head snapped upward to look at his trunk with the snake equivalent of puppy eyes and shook his head. "That's what I thought." Chuckling to himself, Ashlock returned his attention to Stella. "With the sun up, there's no time to waste," Ashlock said to Stella. "Get in position, and I will activate the Mystic Realm." Stella nodded, and with a snap of her fingers, she summoned a portal and appeared next to Diana by the tree. "Now, do I activate Progeny Dominion before or after Mystic Realm?" Ashlock pondered. It was a big concern, as what if he could not locate his offspring within the strange fog to cast Progeny Dominion on? The Mystic Realm had spawned at the same place the last 2 times he used it, but his Progeny Dominion let him cast any skills he wanted from an offspring. So what would happen if he released the Mystic Realm from another tree than himself? Could he cast it from an offspring and put his main body inside the Mystic Realm? What's the worst case scenario if I cast Mystic Realm from my offspring rather than myself? That the Mystic Realm spawns away from the tree I am inhabiting, and therefore, I won't be able to enter it. I think that is fine. Deciding it was the best decision, Ashlock cast Progeny Dominion first and selected the demonic tree everyone was standing under. Progeny selected, initiating soul transfer. The mountain peak trembled as his soul fractured, and the fragment was ripped down through his roots and bound with his offspring's soul core. Soul fragmented, damage to soul mitigated. Ashlock felt his vision blur as he focused on his progeny and found himself looking at everyone gathered around the demonic tree that was suddenly blazing with lilac soul fire. Connection complete. Time till sundown 12:30. "Oh, this tree has spatial affinity, that's helpful." Ashlock felt a hint of pride knowing his firstborn followed their dad's footsteps and picked spatial affinity. Dismissing the system notifications regarding his soul transfer and noting that he had a full day of sunlight left, Ashlock told Stella, "Get ready, activating the Mystic Realm now. Everyone, get ready." Stella shouted, and the red clothes held onto each other's shoulders to ensure they ended up in the same realm again, while Elaine and Douglas stepped aside, and Diana and Stella nodded to each other. With everyone prepared to enter the unknown, Ashlock wasted no time and cast Mystic Realm from his progeny rather than his main body. "What the hell?" Ashlock shouted in his mind as if half his body had been dunked underwater with his feet in the air. The world spun and twisted around him, and then, with a snap, he found himself surrounded by the celestial fog. Feeling disorientated from that strange experience, he spread out his spiritual senses in an attempt to ground himself. "Okay, roots are still there, but I can't feel any stone or red vine peak." Ashlock began to freak out. He had become very used to not moving at all and being rooted in place. Suddenly, feeling like he was floating weightlessly in space was disorientating and horrifying. Ashlock wanted nothing but to get away from this experience, so he switched back to his main body, which worked to his relief. From the view of his trunk, the Mystic Realm looked the same as usual and covered much of the mountain peak, including his progeny. "Okay, knowing I can switch back anytime makes me feel a little better." Ashlock let out a sigh of relief, and after a moment to enjoy the feeling of secure stone under him, he switched his vision back to his progeny. "Oh god, it's even worse now after feeling the hard stone around my roots." Trying to calm down and not focus on the fact that there was no ground and that he was nothing but a floating, helpless, and lost tree, Ashlock spread his spiritual sense further and soon located everyone else. It was only now, with more reference points, that he realized he wasn't floating but was sort of grounded in a way. That made him feel better. Ashlock noticed that Stella had grabbed Diana's hand and was leading her straight to him through the celestial fog filled with shards as if she had a homing beacon on his location. "Tree, is that you?" Stella said when she arrived with Maple on her head and Diana in tow. "Yes, it's me," Ashlock replied with abyssal whispers and then noticed the red clothes in the distance and Elaine and Douglas also making their way over to him. "How did you find me?" Ashlock asked Stella. Stella laughed. "Well, you are a bit obvious. I could see a ball of blazing spatial chi through the fog, and I guess I noticed you before Diana due to our matching affinity." "I see, that makes sense." Since he had been frantic, he hadn't kept adequate control over his soul and had turned his progeny into a blazing beacon of lilac soul fire. "Well, this is new," the Grand Elder said as a group of scarlet-haired elders and Amber arrived under the progeny's canopy. Elaine and Douglas arrived moments later and glanced around. "This is so cool," Elaine said as she peeked at the many shards of glass that floated past her, giving her glimpses into other realms. She reached toward one, but Douglas gently lowered her hand. "Once you pick one, you will be trapped there for the next month, so it's best to pick one that calls out to you," Douglas explained. Elaine tilted her head. "Calls out to me? I haven't felt anything like that yet." Strange," Douglas tapped his chin. "Does your soul not feel the urge to chase after some that float by?" "No. Not really." Elaine grew panicked. "Should I feel something? Will I not be able to enter a pocket realm?" "It's going to be fine, calm down." Douglas patted her head. "We just need to find you a pocket realm with void chi, and it will be fine." "Are any of these realms full of void chi?" Stella asked, and nobody seemed able to answer as they looked around at the shards that floated past and shook their heads. Ashlock had finally managed to get a hold of himself and ignore the lack of ground beneath him and had thoroughly concluded that trees weren't designed for interdimensional travel. Curious about the answer to Stella's question regarding pocket realms containing void chi, he spread out his spiritual sense to its max and soon found a border. The mystic realm was vast but not limitless. It was as if they were inside a bubble taken from a nebula. He could sense slight wafts of different chi types coming off the shards. Sure enough, there were none with void chi. Or at least that he could detect. Weird. Ashlock opened his system menu, activated dimensional overlap, and scrolled through all the pocket realms he could pick from in the menu, and sure enough, there were no void options. Ashlock was about to relay his findings to Stella when two people rose from the floor of nothingness near his progeny, drawing concerned gazes from everyone nearby. Their totally expressionless faces, eyes of nothingness, and vibrant hair clued Ashlock to their identity. It was Neptune and Mars. Maple leapt off Stella's head and transformed into his human form. Mars and Neptune. Stella reached forward and grabbed Maple, and held him in her arms like one would a puppy. "Since when could you transform into a human? And why are you so darn small and cute?" His legs could hardly reach the ground as Stella hugged him tight. "Are these two your siblings, Maple? I heard all about them and have been wanting to meet them." "Yes. They are my siblings," Maple pouted as he went limp in Stella's arms and resigned to his fate. "Of course, there are no pocket realms of void chi," Mars explained as they ignored Maple and turned to Elaine. "Because how can you contain nothingness? Void is the absence of else. When one cultivates void chi, they cultivate the absence of chi rather than a type of chi itself." "What?" Elaine said as she placed a hand over her chest and looked concerned. I don't understand." "Of course you don't, that is why my young voidling," Mars said as she stepped toward Elaine. "There is no place for you here. So come with me." Elaine didn't even get a chance to retort as Mars placed a firm hand on her shoulder, and the two vanished into the nothingness below. Everyone stared at the spot where they disappeared with mixed expressions. Maple, did your sibling just kidnap Elaine?" Stella asked. "That's one way to look at it." Maple's squirrel ears drooped against his head as Neptune strode over and then perked back up as Neptune walked past them and stopped before Diana. "Ready to meet the Ravina clan?" Neptune asked, and Ashlock felt a ripple of power spread throughout the mystic realm. Diana's eyes widened. "I can." Neptune reached out a hand. "Only if you trust me." Diana looked at the hand for a moment, but it was evident in her eyes she had made up her mind. Feathered wings sprouted from her back, claws of shadow manifested, and her eyes became swirling abysses. "Please take me to meet those of my bloodline." Neptune lightly smiled. "With pleasure." And with that, they were gone. Chapter 201, Branching Through the Realms. Well, that was quite unexpected. Ashlock's gaze lingered on the spot where Diana had vanished with Neptune. Everything about this space within the mystic realm was plain wrong. There was no floor, yet everyone stood around him as if there was one. The roots of his progeny were still linked up with his main body because otherwise, the skill would cancel, yet he couldn't feel any stone. How did one just vanish into the floor anyway? Will Elaine be fine? Douglas asked Maple, hanging limply in Stella's embrace with a sleepy expression. Maple just nervously chuckled in response and looked away. I'm sure she will be fine. The Redclaw Grand Elder laughed awkwardly and began to walk off across the nothingness with the rest of the Redclaw Elders. We have been waiting for this opportunity all month and are very eager to improve our strength, so please excuse us. See you in a month, Stella shouted after them. Good luck, and Elder Mo, you better reach Star Core. I want to see these weapons you promised me. As you wish, mistress. Elder Mo gave her a deep bow before leaving with the rest of the Redclaws. Ashlock spread his spiritual sense and saw all of them enter a pocket realm overflowing with fire chi a minute or so later. The Grand Elder must have been agitated knowing such a perfect pocket realm had floated on by. Douglas coughed into his hand. I will be off too then. I can't remain one of the weakest in the Ashfolin sect forever. Stella gave Douglas a nod, and Maple gave the man an exhausted thumbs up. Douglas gave Maple an odd look and then shook his head and left. Kaida, don't hang around here hoping Stella is going to take you, Ashlock told the snake near his trunk. You need to be motivated like Douglas. Go find a pocket realm containing a sea of ink or something. Letting out a sad hiss, Kaida slithered off into the celestial fog, which left Ashlock alone with Stella and Maple. So, Tree. What's your plan now? Stella asked while tilting her head. I haven't seen you manage to enter the mystic realm before. That's a good question. In truth, I didn't even know if I could enter the mystic realm in the first place, so I didn't really plan this far ahead. Ashlock said, I have around 12 hours in here before I lose control over this tree, but if the time dilation of the mystic realm is in effect, I should have closer to 50 hours. I see. Well, do you want to come with me? Stella suggested. That tree you're using has spatial affinity, after all. Sure. A moment passed between the two, with neither doing or saying anything. Tree. What? Aren't you going to send us to a spatial chi realm? No. I thought you would go find us one. Stella raised a brow, but the second I touch one of those shards, you will be left behind. Oh right, Ashlock said, so what should we do? You ask me as if you aren't the one capable of summoning a collection of alternate realms, creating pocket realms around yourself, and even dragging creatures like Larry from other realms. You are the expert here, not me. That was fair. Racking his brains for a moment, Ashlock remembered the Redclaws had been holding each other's shoulders to make sure they didn't get separated. Could they follow the same thing despite him being a tree? In all honesty, I'm not even sure if I can enter a pocket realm even by inhabiting my offspring's body, Ashlock told Stella. But one idea we can try is if you touch my trunk and then touch a shard that goes by, maybe we will both be teleported inside. Stella shrugged. Sure. That could work. Let's give it a go. Walking over, she plopped Maple onto his feet and placed one hand on the demonic tree's trunk. You coming with me, Maple? Or are you going to visit your siblings? They will be busy talking and stuff, Maple grumbled as he put his hand on Stella's knee. I will come with you. Stella smiled. All right then, I will just grab the first shard that floats by with spatial chi. Sounds good, Ashlock replied, and a few minutes passed. Stella suddenly reached out and grasped a shard. Ashlock felt a brief pull on his trunk, but Stella vanished along with Maple, leaving Ashlock alone in the swirling celestial fog. Ashlock let out a long sigh. Well, that didn't work. Stella was most certainly holding onto my trunk, and I felt a pull but didn't go with them. Is it because I'm a tree? He glanced down at his roots that vanished into the nothingness below. Was he still anchored to the 9th layer of creation? The link to his main body remained, so was that stopping him? Trying to reach out with telekinesis to drag a shard toward him also proved a fruitless affair. Nothing in his knowledge of the mystic realm skill suggested he could enter one of these shards, but likewise, nothing said he should be excluded. Apart from the fact the mystic realm refuses to manifest around my main trunk, I suppose. Ashlock had noticed from the last few times he cast Mystic Realm that the celestial fog that appeared on the mountain peak would never float anywhere near his trunk as if it was adverse to it. Man, this sucks. I was hyped to go on adventures through the realms, Ashlock sighed, but I guess I will forever remain rooted in place while all those silly two-legged mammals get to run around and do fun things. Ashlock was about to resign to his fate when he noticed the minimized menu of the dimensional overlap skill still in his vision from earlier. Opening it, he saw a slight change to the user interface. Now at the top of the list of pocket realms to choose from alongside their price, there was a group of highlighted ones with the word free next to them with small people icons. What the? Ashlock selected the one at the top that claimed to be a spatial chi realm with 2 people icons, and the option expanded. Spatial chi realm. Description: sealed training realm of the Azure Clan. Chi level: Star Core 7 stage. Environment: hostile. Monsters: true. Current occupants: 2. Someone from the Azure Clan created this pocket realm. Isn't that the clan responsible for the book of spatial concepts I've been learning spatial lock from? Ashlock ran down the rest of the information, and it was all a bit concerning. Stella was still in the first stage of the Star Core realm, so to be in a place many stages higher than her level seemed like bad news. Furthermore, this realm had a hostile environment and monsters. But it says there are 2 occupants, so that means Maple is with her. Ashlock sighed in relief. 7th stage may be too much for Stella to handle, but it was nothing to Maple from his understanding of the rascal. Ashlock mentally hovered over the free purchase button, and a system prompt appeared. Due to a Mystic Realm agent being present in the selected pocket realm, the cost of dimensional overlap is null. However, this only applies so long as you are also in the Mystic Realm. Ashlock closed the menu and switched to his main body on red. Vine peeked to confirm the system's words. Ashlock was relieved that the sun had hardly climbed through the sky, suggesting that the 4x time dilation was in effect within the celestial fog. 1 week out here was a month in there. System: open the dimensional overlap menu. One look at the user interface confirmed the system's previous words. Sure enough, there's no free option displayed here, but 4 options are still highlighted at the top with the small people icons. Wait, only 4. That means 2 are missing. I assume Diana and Elaine. A quick click through confirmed a pocket realm for Spatial, Ink, Fire, and Earth. But no Void or Water Chi ones. So Neptune and Mars really did take them somewhere else outside of the Mystic Realm or system's jurisdiction. Ashlock really wanted to know what was happening to the both of them right now. Alas, his curiosity would have to wait, as he could not reach them until the Mystic Realm ended or the World Wookers returned them. That aside, I came out here to quickly test something. Selecting the same spatial pocket realm as before that was highlighted. 300 credits link fee and then 20 credits a minute to maintain it. Whereas it's free for my progeny inside the Mystic Realm. Interesting. Returning his focus back to the tree within the Mystic Realm and briefly screaming at the sudden feeling of no ground beneath him, Ashlock quickly checked on the other free options highlighted at the top of his menu. Ink Chi Realm. Description: Hatchery of the Midnight Inkwing. Chi level: Soul Fire 3rd stage. Environment: peaceful. Monsters: none. Current occupants: 1. Glad to see Kaida found a relatively peaceful-looking pocket realm around his cultivation level, but the fact it's a hatchery for a rather deadly-sounding monster doesn't bode well. Fire Chi Realm. Description: Blaze Titan Graveyard. Chi level: Star Core 2nd stage. Environment: treacherous. Monsters: true. Current occupants: 5. Looks like the Red Clothes ended up in a dangerous pocket realm much like Stella, but with the Grand Elder there being a few stages above the pocket realm's level of Star Core 2nd stage, they should be fine. Ashlock clicked out and then went to the last free option, which was none other than Douglas's. Earth Chi Realm. Description: Dragonite Mines. Chi level: Soul Fire 8th stage. Environment: neutral. Monsters: true. Current occupants: 1. Dragonite Mines. And the place is 2 stages higher than him. Ashlock had judged that Douglas had a deep hatred for mines, considering his reaction to the last time there was a misunderstanding between them when Douglas thought Ashlock wanted him to be a miner for the Ashfolin sect. As much as Ashlock wanted to offer his aid to Douglas, he couldn't imagine he would be much use underground as a tree, so he went back to the first option, the Spatial Chi Realm, and hit the free button. Everything flashed around him in a swirling nebula as space tore open above him, and he felt the sky fall on his head. Dimensional overlap initiated. In an instant, he was somewhere else, somewhere new. He could tell by the sudden overwhelming spatial chi that slammed into his trunk and the mind-bending view. All around him, space was twisted and contorted in bewildering patterns, creating a dizzying landscape of fractured realities, suspended islands, and swirling vortexes that seemed to lead nowhere. Spreading out his spiritual sense, he soon located Stella, who stood on a nearby cliff, gazing at this strange new world. The spatial wind sent her hair flying in random directions, but she seemed mostly calm, with Maple having reverted to his squirrel form and perched on her shoulder. Beyond the cliff was a kaleidoscopic expanse that seemed to birth nightmarish creatures, whose forms varied as wildly as the pocket realm. There were many beasts with multiple shifting limbs and entities that seemed to phase in and out of existence. These monsters seemed capable of defying logic and reason, such as traveling vast distances in the blink of an eye or contorting their bodies to exploit the realm's mutable geometry. Terrifying, yes, but there was something more lurking below. Soon, colossal heads of serpentine behemoths lurched out to devour these birth nightmares, only to fade back into whatever reality they had come from once they had secured their meal. At the center of all this madness was a floating island with a grand temple of blue stone that seemed to be orbiting a dying star. As the only visible man-made structure, Ashlock assumed it belonged to the creators of this pocket realm, the Azure Clan. Tree. Is that you? Stella said as she turned around and looked at him in bewilderment. She strode over but then paused a couple meters away. Yes, Stella, it's me, Ashlock replied. I used the technique from earlier that lets me create a pocket realm around my trunk to get here. Ashlock looked down and noticed that the area around him was nothingness, just like it had been in the mystic realm. Despite being on some mountain, he still couldn't feel any stone around his roots. Like a kid scared of falling in a pool, Stella poked the nothingness around him with her foot and found herself able to stand on it, much like she had back in the mystic realm. After a few more tests, she eventually committed and carefully approached him with Maple having climbed onto her head. I was somewhat confused and worried when we left you behind, so I am glad you are here now, Stella sighed in relief and then chuckled nervously. I seem to have picked quite an interesting pocket realm this time. Yes, you certainly did, Ashlock replied. I have reasons to believe that giant blue stone temple over there belonged to the Azure family. Stella seemed confused for a second, but then her eyes widened. That Azure Clan. The one who wrote those books? Stella asked as she turned to squint at the island in the far distance. Why do you think that building belongs to them? Ashlock chuckled, because this pocket realm belongs to the Azure Clan. Stella's jaw dropped. You don't think there is some immortal inheritance in that building, do you? Like the one Elder Mo got in the last round. Ashlock brought up his system menu once more. Spatial Chi Realm. Description: Sealed Training Realm of the Azure Clan. Chi Level: Star Core 7 Stage. Environment: Hostile. Monsters: True. Current Occupants: 3. It's listed as a sealed training realm for the clan, Ashlock replied, so maybe. But I doubt it. A training ground. Stella grinned. Sounds interesting. Now, be careful. This place is filled with almost nascent soul levels of spatial chi. Those monsters down there are out of both of our leagues. Stella frowned but then turned to the side and met eyes with Maple. Say, Maple. You said you were hungry, right? Chapter 202, A Twisted Feast. Stella, don't look over there. Ashlock used black vines to create a wall around them to obscure the horrifying sight. Just keep your eyes on me. But. Stella muttered as she tried to look over her shoulder. No buts. One peek, and you will never be able to see Maple the same again, Ashlock insisted as he tightened the wall of vines. Just trust me this one time, okay? Fine, Stella sighed and flopped down against the tree trunk. Let me know when he's done eating. Stella closed her eyes and began cultivating. Will do, don't you worry, Ashlock replied in relief. Even with Stella deep in meditation, Ashlock never took down the wall of black vines just in case. Stella opened her eyes and saw the massacre occurring over the twisted reality between this cliff and the central floating island housing the blue brick building that likely belonged to the Azure Clan. He was able to witness everything happening within the pocket realm through spiritual sense due to the abundant spatial chi. He would use Eye of the Tree God, but that skill only worked over where he had roots. In the distance, Maple was floating in what could be described as the sky of this place. The cute squirrel had taken on a similar appearance to his World Walker siblings as a titanic mass of squirming tentacles centered around a single golden eye and abyssal mouth. Tentacles of void much like those Ashlock manifested with his consuming abyss skill shot out from Maple and plunged down into the kaleidoscopic expanse below that housed the birth's nightmares and reality-devouring serpents. These void tendrils delved deep into the expanse and skewered and wrapped around the waiting serpents that were 100 meters long and then hauled the screaming monsters from the depths and up to his mouth. As if they were noodles, Maple slurped up the rainbow-scaled serpents, and bits of flesh and blood rained down from his teeth and were swept away by the vortexes to nowhere. Maple was having a feast, which made Ashlock jealous and terribly hungry. He tried to manifest some portals over the kaleidoscopic expanse near monsters in the distance with the plan of dragging them back with his black vines, but he soon ran into a problem. Much like his limited vision with Eye of the Tree God, he could only make portals a few meters from his trunk. Oh, I forgot about this annoying limitation, Ashlock cursed. He could only create portals over land where he had roots. After all, they were supposed to be short-range portals designed to be made around a person's body. It just so happened that back in the real world, his body spread out for many miles so he could make these short-range portals over vast distances. Maple. Hey Maple. Ashlock shouted. Chuck some food over here. The mass of tentacles ignored Ashlock's plea and continued with his meal. Darn it, I should have spent my time learning one of those attack-orientated spatial techniques like Warp Strike or Spatial Blades rather than a more defensive one like Spatial Lock. Ashlock grumbled as he thought of a way he could grab some of the food. But even then, how can I get the food to me? If he spent some sacrificial credits on consuming Abyss and something came close enough, he could lash out and reel them in with a void tendril, much like Maple was doing, but nothing seemed to be nearby. This pocket realm was enormous, and Maple was easily many miles away from him. When he had fought the Cloud Titan many months ago, which almost killed him, he had hurled spatial chi around in vague forms that mimicked attack skill, but these monsters were birthed from spatial chi. What would his malformed spatial chi into attacks amount to in their eyes? Would they see him as a joke? There has to be something I can do here. Ashlock mulled over his options. Other than his system often giving him support-based abilities like fruit production to empower his allies, he also noticed his other abilities often came with limited ranges or were empowered when near his trunk. This drawback had been reduced somewhat, with him now able to cast skills through one of his progeny. But I am already using my progeny. Ashlock sighed as the hunger for slaughter gnawed at his mind. He wanted to devour those monsters like Maple was doing so badly, but how? They were so close yet so far. Being a tree sure was a drawback sometimes. Wait, I need to stop thinking about myself. I just need someone or something to bring the corpses to me so I can eat them. Naturally, Ashlock looked to his nearest ally, Stella, but dismissed her. She was far too weak for this realm, being only at the first stage of the Star Core realm, and would be killed in minutes if she tried to go hunting for him. Not to mention the abomination in the sky called Maple that would give her nightmares, Ashlock mused. So if I can't rely on Stella and my sect members are in other pocket realms, that leaves me with Larry and the ints to choose from that are defending my main body. Assuming I can even bring them here. It was difficult, like trying to look in two directions at once, and was made even worse due to the time dilation between the mystic realm and the outside world. Still, Ashlock managed to manifest a portal between his main trunk and the progeny a fraction of his soul was inhabiting, proving it was possible to create a portal anywhere so long as he was connected via his roots. Okay, so far so good. Returning his full attention to his progeny, he gazed at his main body through the wobbling portal. The leaves are rustling in the wind so slowly. It's like watching a nature documentary in slow motion. That aside, he now needed to decide who best fit the job. Larry and his spiders are most certainly useless here, so that leaves the ints. Ashlock mused, Maple is going to devour most of those reality-eating serpents, leaving those nightmarish creatures with deformed and shifting limbs as my targets. They are fast and able to teleport great distances in the blink of an eye, which is why Maple has mostly ignored them as they are hard to catch, so I need an ent that can attack and kill fast. Luckily, Ashlock had 3 such ints that fit the requirements. There's no doubt that Chaos is the best at killing a single target, but her void step to get close to the monsters consumes a lot of chi, so she would run out after only a few kills. So that leaves me, Zeus or Soul, as Titus would be far too slow to catch any of these spatial attuned monsters. Ashlock eventually decided to call Soul through the portal as a light beam was many times faster than a lightning bolt, and the ent was his one with the highest cultivation stage. Soul lit up the mountain as he stepped through and, upon Ashlock's instructions, walked over to the cliff. As if broken from his feeding frenzy by the sudden ball of light, Maple's giant golden eye rotated to look straight at them and paused with a half-eaten snake in his mouth. Maple then slowly munched on the snake while floating toward them through the sky like some type of eldritch cloud. Once the snake had been consumed, the squirming mass of tentacles compressed down into a fluffy white squirrel and promptly collapsed on the stone next to Soul and fell asleep. He looked so round and bloated that Ashlock wondered if the squirrel would explode if he poked him. Stella was deep in meditation when something bloomed within her consciousness, demanding her attention, and the familiar white fog appeared. Maple is done eating, Ashlock said in 1,000 voices. Perhaps she was just getting used to his charming voice, or she was overdosing on Mind Fortress pills, but the many voices didn't sound as jarring as before. Emerging from the deep recesses of her mind, she woke up a moment later from meditation and stretched her back while the vortex of spatial chi that had gathered around her dissipated. Phew, the spatial chi in this place is so dense I should go up a stage or two during my month here, Stella mused as she jumped up and glanced around. The wall of black vines was gone, giving her a full view of the distorted world and soul, whose blinding light was hard to look at. Shifting her gaze away, she noticed Maple on the floor, who looked like he was in a food coma near Saul's leg. Running over to Maple while giving Saul a confused look, Stella laughed as she scooped up the very round Maple and put him on her head. You glutton. Look how fat you are now. Stella felt the weight shift around on her head as Maple sleepily reached out, grabbed strands of her hair, and rolled up like a blanket. So, tree, what is Soul doing here? Stella asked the demonic tree ablaze with power behind her. Well, you see those monsters teleporting around the expanse between here and the island with the building? Ashlock asked. Stella had seen them within moments of arriving here. I want to eat them to advance my cultivation, so I brought Soul here to slaughter them, as even those monsters can't react fast enough to a light beam. There's just one problem. Which is? Stella asked while peeking over the cliff. I can command Soul to kill the monsters from here, but I can't figure out how to bring the corpses back to me. My range of influence is severely restricted in this pocket realm as I have no roots. So portals are a no-go. Stella tapped her chin. What if I get them for you? Those monsters look a bit strong, but with Saul's backup, I should be able to handle them. You sure? Ashlock sounded concerned. My ability to assist you here is limited, and Maple ate enough snakes to make them extinct, so you will be on your own with only Saul's long-range support. Maple will relay my words as I can't communicate with my abyssal whispers technique outside the range of my roots. Tree sure worries a lot about me. Stella smiled. But I can do this. Even if he can't talk or help me directly. Not a problem, I will be careful. Stella summoned 2 swords and threw one to the ground. Back on Red Vine Peak, she used portals to travel around, but here, the spatial chi was too high above her stage and chaotic to listen to her, so she would have to travel by flying sword. Hopping onto the floating sword ablaze with her spatial chi, her star core pulsed, producing a force that kept her afloat. Unsheathing her star-patterned sword that Ashlock gifted her and holding it before her, she closed her eyes. Reality was far too distorted in this pocket realm to depend on sight alone to traverse the many vortexes and floating islands, so she entered the spatial plane and reduced everything around her into absolute grids that dispelled all illusions and falsehoods. The floating sword hummed below her feet as she moved forward and off the cliff. Nothing but a monster-infested expanse lay below her. Okay, I can't lie. This is a little terrifying, but Maple ate most of those lurking serpents, so I should be fine, right? Calming her breathing and pounding heart, she focused on getting some food for Tree. With her eyes still closed, she held her sword before her face and dove down toward a group of deformed monsters with shifting limbs. The chaotic winds of this place rustled her hair and clothes as she dove down. The monsters seemed to notice her approaching, and Stella felt a ripple through the spatial plane as they vanished and reappeared in a ring around her without even needing to make portals. They knew the spatial step technique she wanted to learn. Many limbs ending in claws came at her all at once. Shit. Stella twisted her body to meet the nearest monster with her sword and was winded by the sheer force of its strike against her blade. Despite her eyes being closed, the world around her went briefly white, and all the monsters' heads exploded with a strange pop and a shower of translucent blood. Using telekinesis, Stella stopped the blood from showering her and the corpses from falling to the expanse below. Her spatial ring flashed, and the monsters quickly filled the space within one of her rings. Opening her eyes, she looked down at her shaking arm, still holding her sword that had fended off that single attack from that strong monster, and then glanced over her shoulder at the distant mountain ledge. Soul stood there with many of his arms reaching back into the floating ball of light that hovered where his head should be. What a strange end. Stella felt the words die in her throat when a monster materialized out of thin air in front of her, encompassing her entire view. Its skin was a shimmering mix of colors. Many black eyes poking out of crevasses in its flesh gazed at her with hunger, and its body split open to reveal a mouth of crooked teeth large enough to consume her in one bite. Stella didn't even have time to raise her sword to react, but she didn't have to. A beam of light tore through its back and exploded its head with pinpoint accuracy. Soul may be watching your back, but that doesn't mean you can be careless, silly human, Maple reminded her. Yeah, my bad, Stella sighed as she re-entered the spatial plane. Everything about this place was out to kill her, so it was time to get serious and maybe even try and activate her bloodline. Ashlock had given Soul a single command. Kill everything that gets near Stella. In moments like these, Ashlock understood why Necroflora Sovereign was an SS-grade skill, and Soul had been worth creating over the 1,000 points Lucius's corpse would have given if devoured. The 3-meter tall and stood on the cliff edge, walking in circles like a turret as his many arms reached into the floating orb of light in rotation, retrieved the ball of light chi, and then effortlessly threw it and accurately killed any monster that got within 100 meters of Stella from miles away like a railgun. Meanwhile, Stella crouched down on the flat side of her flying sword like a surfboard, gripping the tip with one hand and holding the other sword over her back. She kept as low of a profile as possible as she zoomed around, narrowly missing the teleporting monster's claws aimed at her head. Crazed laughter escaped her lips as she twisted and turned through their swiping limbs. The monsters exploded around the girl as Soul followed his master's absolute order to bring death upon those who got too close to Stella. Her spatial ring flashed with silvery light, and the raining corpses were sucked into her spatial storage, which only seemed to enrage the monsters more. After an hour, the ball of light that made Soul's head had dimmed, and it was clear that End was slowing down, which put Stella at risk. Also, Ashlock couldn't hold his hunger back anymore, especially since Soul was linked to his progeny via a black root and had been consuming an ungodly amount of chi. Maple, tell Stella to come back. Soul is out of chi. Ashlock told Maple as he couldn't tell Stella directly. Stella complied after being smacked on the head by Maple and began to return. The monsters didn't let up and pursued her by ripping through space and lashing out at her through rifts, which made it hard for Soul to support her as attacks came from beyond. Luckily, Stella wasn't weak and fended them off with evasive maneuvers and well-timed parries with her sword. Once she got close enough to the cliff with hundreds of monsters on her tail, she created an unstable portal to the space beside Soul and hurled herself through. Ah! She tumbled a few times across the stone before stopping upside down against the demonic tree. Ouch! Stella hissed as she rubbed her head and placed the still sleeping Maple to the side. That went well. I'm surprised they let me go. Hundreds of monsters appeared all around them. Looks like the feast has come to me, Ashlock cheered as he activated Consuming Abyss. Soul, flashbang them, Ashlock commanded, and the Ent used his remaining chi to turn the world white, blinding all the monsters as a lake of void spread out, and hundreds of void tendrils shot out and carved holes through the flesh of the many monsters and dragged them down into the void below to be consumed. Plus 320 SC. Plus 403 SC. Plus 280 SC. Otherworldly screams accompanied the many notifications flashing through Ashlock's mind about the many sacrificial credits pouring in. Chapter 203, Bastion. Among a mist of blood and slaughter, Ashlock deactivated his Consuming Abyss skill after confirming everything nearby was dead. The void lake and tendrils withdrew into his progeny, and a moment of peace returned to the mountain in this twisted realm. In the distance, he could see many monsters fleeing back into the expanse. They were all around the size of a car, so only the nearest ones had suffered from the blinding light and eaten void tendrils to the face. The moment they saw how easily their fellow monsters had died, they teleported away without looking back. If Soul wasn't out of chi, the Ent could gun them down with light beams, but alas, Soul had collapsed to the side and was still. Maple seemed equally uninterested in pursuing the small fry as he continued to sleep, and Ashlock sadly had no way to chase them down. So he had to let them go for now. That was surprisingly easy, Ashlock hummed to himself. I suppose the monsters here are only adapted to fighting other spatial affinity monsters and perhaps cultivators from the Azure Clan. One flashbang and a few void tendrils utterly overwhelmed monsters a few stages above me in cultivation. Black thorn-covered vines devoured the few corpses dotted around that hadn't been consumed by the void, and the last few notifications of sacrificial credits came through. Plus 387 SC. Plus 363 SC. Plus 210 SC. Stella pushed herself off his trunk and glanced around, clearly impressed. Wow, you really slaughtered them that easily. Stella curled her hair behind her ears. Did you go up a cultivation stage? No, I didn't actually. Now that you mention it, that's rather strange, Ashlock replied and brought up his system menu. Surely killing even 10 of these monsters should bring about some benefits to his cultivation. Demonic Demi-Divine Tree, age, 9. Star Core, 5th stage. Soul type, Amethyst, Spatial. Still the same. Wait. Ashlock checked on his progeny and saw it had gone up a few stages in the Soul Fire realm, and the fractured part of his soul inhabiting the tree also seemed to be glowing with power. I guess I will get the cultivation boost when the fractured part of my soul returns to my body. Ashlock concluded and then brought up his sign-in system. Idolatry Daily Sign-in System. Day, 3552. Daily Credit, 10. Sacrifice Credit, 4580. Sign-in. Holy shit. Ashlock knew he had killed a lot of those monsters, but this was by far the most points he had ever seen. Okay, calm down and think logically about this. Clearly, I need to sign in and spend these credits, but my last highest sign-in was around 3,600 credits, and that upgraded my B-grade skill Root Puppet into my SS-grade Necroflora Sovereign skill. So would 4,500 be enough to guarantee an SS-grade or higher skill that isn't an upgrade as those are cheaper? Ashlock pondered momentarily and decided he didn't want to risk it. Ideally, he wanted an SSS-grade draw if possible but had no idea how many credits he needed for one. Around 5,000 should be enough, right? No way I need 10,000. It was annoying how randomized his system was sometimes. For all he knew, it might upgrade his darn hibernate skill or something. Stella, how many corpses do you have? Ashlock asked the girl who was wandering around the mountain, balancing the fat maple on her head. Let me check. Stella closed her eyes, waved her hand, and in a flash of silver light, a pile of those fiendish corpses appeared. Despite the grotesque sight, all Ashlock felt was hunger. Is the darn progeny affecting my mind? I don't usually get this hungry, especially right after a meal. Ashlock summoned a black vine and used the spike on the end to skewer a corpse and then handed it to another black vine. A moment later, after reducing the corpse to nothing but sludge, he got a notification. Plus 270 SC. Almost. Should just need one more. Ashlock picked up a particularly large one and decided to eat it as dessert. Plus 387 SC. Stella, store the corpses away again. I want to eat them in a moment, but the hunger is too much. Ashlock instructed. He would sign in and then eat the rest to make sure he had some credits on hand. Sure thing. Stella waved her hand, and the corpses once again vanished, and Ashlock sighed in relief as the intense hunger briefly subsided. System. Idolatry Daily Sign-in System. Day, 3552. Daily Credit, 10. Sacrifice Credit, 5,237. Sign in. Please, please, please don't give me something useless. Ashlock prayed to the gotcha gods. Sign in. Sign in successful. 5,247 credits consumed. Unlocked an SSS grade skill, Skyborn Bastion. No fucking way information regarding the skill bloomed in his mind, and Ashlock's vision faded black. He was back in this accursed dream filled with torment and rage. Wait, when had he been here before? Why does this feeling of agelessness and melancholy gnawing at his soul feel so familiar? The celestial fog of the void swirled around his endless trunk that grew to touch the heavens. It was quiet. He was all alone. It was a peaceful but dull existence. The life of a gray tree. But he could feel the inevitable death drawing near. It was inescapable. He was weak. No way to fight back. They are here. Vast brown ships made from the corpses of his children arrived once more, carrying thousands of those greedy beings here to harvest his golden sap. Banners flew from the vessels in the celestial winds as they traversed through the pocket realms under his domain and slaughtered all the monsters he spawned in their way. The great tree envied their ability to come and go. All he could do was stay stagnant and accept a slow death. Even if the great tree found a way to fight back, these mortal creatures would simply flee and come back in more significant numbers. Though he harbored the essence of creation within his roots, his influence could not extend beyond his dominion. He could not flee. So, the great tree accepted its fated death. Slow and sorrowful. The vessels pressed against the tree's trunk that grew throughout the realms, and then the pain came. It was hot and sharp as a metal tool pierced his bark and extracted the golden essence. He screamed for eternity. Ashlock snapped back to the twisted reality of the pocket realm and felt something hitting his trunk. Tree. Ashlock. Dad. Are you okay? Talk to me. Stella shouted as she drummed her fists on his bark with tears running down her face. Stella, I'm back. Calm down, it's okay, Ashlock said quickly in her mind. What happened? How long was I in that dream for? Oh, thank the heavens you are okay. You just stopped replying, and I could feel your soul was in deep turmoil. Stella collapsed against the trunk and hugged her legs. You were out for a few hours, I would guess. Ashlock checked his sign-in system. Idolatry daily sign-in system. Day, 3552. Daily credit, 0. Sacrifice credit, 0. Sign in. According to this, a day hasn't passed. Is that because it goes off the passage of time my main trunk experiences, which is outside of the pocket realm's time dilation? If so, that means around an hour or so must have passed outside. Ashlock mulled but then realized now wasn't the time for pondering. He was at 0 credits across the board and had just gained his first ever SSS grade skill. If he were to be attacked either here or in the real world right now without any credits on hand, he would perish. Sorry, Stella, but can you summon those corpses again? I need them to regain my strength. Stella was wiping her tears with one arm. She raised the other, and with a wave of silvery light, the pile reappeared. Thanks. You just relax and recover for a moment while I eat, Ashlock said as the ghastly hunger returned in full force. She nodded slowly as he cast Consuming Abyss, and for a while, only Stella's shaky breaths and the sound of corpses being devoured filled the mountain peak. Ashlock was equally as disturbed. He remembered more of those strange dreams he received from the system and became increasingly concerned about the fate of the last world tree and this endless cycle. Even with him returning to reality, there was still some lingering phantom pain on his bark where those ships of cultivators had stabbed the last world tree and extracted the golden sap as if it were oil. Worst of all, Ashlock actually related to the dream this time more than ever. The feeling of helplessness as foes fled beyond his reach. Luckily, the system had granted him something to solve this issue. His new SSS grade skill Skyborn Bastion, which was likely why he had received such a fitting dream. To show him the mercy the system had granted him. The information in his mind was confusing and muddled with the dream, so he decided the best way to test it was with some hands-on experience. It was a tool to be used, after all. Checking his sacrificial credits after the meal and seeing they were at 1,580, he knew he had enough to activate this very pricey skill. Stella, are you ready to fly? Stella awoke from her daze and gazed up at the canopy overhead. Fly. Yeah. Never heard of a flying tree before. Ashlock chuckled, you might want to stand far away before I activate this technique. Okay, Stella got up, and after making sure Maple was secured to her head, she walked away. Is here fine? Maybe double that. You're still too close, Ashlock replied. Here? Stella asked from quite far away. Ashlock mentally measured around 30 meters and decided she was well out of the way. Yeah, that's great. Just stay there until I call you. Mentally bringing up his system screen, he activated his new skill Skyborn Bastion SSS. Do you wish to activate the Skyborn Bastion? The cost is 1,000 sacrificial credits and the required materials to form a Bastion core. Yes. Ashlock saw 1,000 credits vanish in the corner of his vision. He then felt something begin to eat away at the stone below him. Forming Bastion core. The mountain began to tremble, and waves of power began rippling out. Bastion's chi source has been designated as Ashlock. Ashlock felt the roots of his progeny disconnect from the root network yet somehow maintain a sort of ethereal connection that went across space and time. He now knew he would always maintain a link to this progeny no matter where it was. Bastion's operator has been designated as unnamed progeny. From the information in his mind, Ashlock knew the Bastion needed a source of chi to operate the shield and artillery. Since his main body was the largest source of chi, it would almost always be chosen unless he mentally changed it. As for the operator, that was the tree directly linked to the Bastion core and would give it commands. Error, unnamed progeny cultivation too low to operate Bastion core. Initiating tribulation. Wait, what? Ashlock shouted as the pocket realm's sky was ripped open. The world rumbled and flashed white as golden lightning arced down and struck the tree. Ashlock's lightning chi barrier activated and absorbed much of the impact. Unnamed progeny soul fire 5th stage. More lightning came. Unnamed progeny soul fire 6th stage. A purple barrier rippled across the tree's branches and trunk, braving the brutal assault of heaven. Unnamed progeny soul fire 7th stage. Tree, do you need help? Stella screamed over the thunder. No, Stella. My child is facing a tribulation, do not fear. Unnamed progeny soul fire 8th stage. Notifications flashed through his mind as the world roared with heaven's rage. Unnamed progeny soul fire 9th stage. Forming star core. A blazing ball of purple soul fire rose from the top of the tree and hovered overhead, leaving nothing but the fragment of Ashlock's soul behind in the tree. This wasn't his ascension. It was his child's, and he could only watch from the sidelines as a supportive dad. As my firstborn and the first to ascend to star core, Ashlock shouted over the thunder of the heavens, I will grant you a name. From now on, you will be known as Willow Ashfolin, my first progeny. Ashlock felt a wave of happiness from Willow that was a more profound level of emotion than he had ever felt before. But this deep emotion soon turned into absolute fear as the heavens rumbled. Lightning struck down in the dozens at his floating soul. Stand strong, my son. It will be over soon. A long 10 minutes passed before the tear in the pocket realm began to seal up, and the wrath of heaven subsided. Star core formed. The blazing ball of purple fire, now many times the size of before, plummeted down and entered the tree. The inside of the trunk, much like Ashlock in the outside world, was now a furnace of soul fire, and Ashlock's soul shard was suspended in the middle. Bastion's operator has been successfully designated as Willow Ashfolin. Bastion's affinity type set to amethyst, spatial. Ashlock felt a giant amethyst crystal form under Willow and grow to encompass his roots. A sudden feeling of control over the surrounding rock overcame his mind as if it were an extra limb, and he could also feel Willow's curiosity. You okay, Willow? Ashlock asked, and the tree actually rustled a little as if it was happy. Okay, so not capable of complex speech yet. But this is already much better than your siblings. Skyborn Bastion active. Ashlock felt the ground crack and tremble as he mentally tried to free himself from the mountain. Stella, come jump on. Without hesitation, Stella ran over and effortlessly leapt onto the mass of black rock that was breaking free and levitating away from the mountain. The bastion was currently around 30 meters in length and 10 meters in width and shaped like a boat made entirely of black stone with Willow mounted on top. Ashlock knew that this was the basic size bastion that came with the initial cost, and he could expand the size of the bastion for more sacrificial credits and materials. He could even make a fleet of them so long as he was willing to pay the price. Tree. What is this floating rock? Stella asked as she hauled Soul away from the edge and closer to Willow. Are you using telekinesis? Sort of, Ashlock replied, but it can do far more than a simple floating piece of rock. This is my bastion technique, a way for me to take the fight to my enemies. Oh. Stella suddenly seemed very interested. Does that mean we can hunt down those monsters that escaped? Sure does. What makes this different from a floating rock then? Stella tilted her head. Well, other than me being able to use all my other techniques through Willow on the move. Who's Willow? Stella asked while looking around, confused. Willow is this demonic tree I'm inhabiting, which just ascended to the star core realm like you. I named him Willow Ashfolin after me as my first offspring. Well, that's so cool. Stella found a flimsy branch and shook it like a hand. Nice to meet you, little bro Willow. Willow responded in kind, by raining a few scarlet leaves on her head. Anyway, sorry I got distracted. Stella stepped back. You were saying Ash. What can this thing do? Just sit back and watch. Ashlock knew the bastion had many features, so he went through and activated them all one by one to show Stella. System, activate the shield. Ashlock felt the bastion core glow with chi drawn from his main body through space, and a bubble of spatial chi manifested around the ship, dyeing the outside world in a slight purple hue. Spatial shield, active. Wow, Stella mumbled. System power up the artillery. Along the ship's edge, giant flowers emerged from the black stone. They followed the color scheme of a demonic tree with black stems and petals that looked dyed in blood. Spatial artillery, active. Hey, Willow, fire one of the cannons at that fleeing monster in the distance. Ashlock and Stella watched as one of the flowers rotated its petal head toward the monster in the distance. Spatial chi surged through its black stem, setting the whole flower on fire in purple soul flames. This soul fire then began to gather on the petal head into a ball that kept condensing down until it was basically a mini black hole. Fire when ready, Willow, Ashlock said, and a moment later, the flower recoiled backward. The black hole ripped through the twisted reality and caught the monster by surprise, taking out half its torso. Good shot, Ashlock praised Willow, and the tree seemed very proud of itself, which amused Ashlock to no end. Stella jumped through the shield that rippled around her body and dove toward the corpse while riding her sword. It was nearby, so she quickly retrieved it into her spatial ring and then returned to the bastion. Dumping the corpse before Willow, Ashlock devoured the corpse. Plus 394 SC. That's a third of the bastion's cost regained already, Ashlock mused. Sometimes you have to spend money to make money, and this floating ship is basically like a giant ant that will allow me to better explore these pocket realms and hunt down monsters just like the last world tree couldn't do. So this floating bastion, as you called it, has a shield and firepower, Stella said as she deposited her sword. Anything else? Well, I can alter the weather around us based on the bastion core type, so since it's spatial, I can make spatial storms, Ashlock explained, but if you look around, that's a rather pointless thing to waste chi on here as that's all this pocket realm is. One giant spatial storm. There was a rather high chi cost to maintaining the bastion's functions. Or there would be if they weren't surrounded by so much spatial chi that Willow and the bastion could absorb. That does make sense. Best not to waste chi on pointless things, Stella rubbed her chin as she wandered to the ship's bow. So, where are we flying to? Let's head for that Azure Clan building in the distance, shall we? Ashlock felt the thrill of adventure in his bark. I like that idea, Stella said as she unsheathed her sword and pointed the tip at the distant island, Chargy. There was a moment of silence as the ship slowly floated forward. Stella lowered her sword and frowned. Why is it so slow? System. Can we increase the speed? Bastion's speed is limited to 10% of the maximum when traveling outside Ashlock's domain, and power consumption is greatly increased. So I can use the bastion to travel outside of the range of my routes. It's just slow and expensive. The system didn't offer him an answer, but he suspected he was right. The bastion could travel 10 times faster than this while over land with his routes but was reduced to a crawl elsewhere. Sorry Stella, the thing is slow when it's being used away from home, Ashlock sighed. Seems it's more of a defensive skill than an offensive one. Stella shrugged and leaned against the tree. How long can it really take? I'll just cultivate or something. With her entering meditation, Ashlock hooked up Soul with a black root to bring the ant back to life with some chi. It was going to be a long journey. As it turned out, it took the rest of the day to pilot the bastion across the expanse and to dock with the island. Which meant that more than 6 hours had now passed in the outside world. During the trip, the bastion had been like a floating ball of tasty spatial chi, drawing the attention of the monsters like a moth to a flame, making them easy to slaughter. Ashlock may have spent 1,000 credits on the bastion, but he had already made 2,302 credits from hunting the monsters, which he was sitting on for now. Who knew delving into pocket realms was so profitable? No wonder the merchants made a life out of it. I wonder when Stella will return, Ashlock sighed as he watched the slightly ajar grand doorway to the blue brick building. Stella had gone in with Maple, Soul, and Larry, whom he had brought here via a portal to explore the inside of this Azure Clan building. From the looks of it, the building serves as some type of library, but due to a formation blocking spatial chi, I can't see what's inside from out here. Another hour went by. I swear I will ram the bastion into the darn building if I have to, Ashlock grumbled. He was feeling terribly left out of this grand adventure. Feeling bored, he debated spending some credits on expanding the size of his bastion, but 30 credits per meter sounded rather steep. But the added size would give more space to build things like runic formations or even barracks to hold his ints. But then something happened. Ashlock heard an explosion occur inside the building, and seconds later, Stella ran out in terror alongside Soul and Larry. Tree. Get the bastion moving. We gotta go. Stella shouted as she snapped a portal into existence to get closer to him. What's happening? Ashlock asked in a panic as he powered up the shields and cannons and began drifting backward away from the island. He had never seen Stella so flustered. It's the Azure Clan, Stella said while winded and collapsed on the black stone. They suddenly came through a portal in the library and saw us. Wait. The Azure Clan are here. Ashlock had not expected a clan that was likely from a higher layer of creation to suddenly make an appearance. Well, shit, Ashlock muttered as he saw cultivators in blue robes pour out of the building, and one of them pointed at the bastion. Chapter 204, Azure Clan. Elder Vortexian. Yes. Elder Vortexian of the Azure Clan looked up from his desk at the intruder of his peace. The scrawny man gulped when facing his glare, so he diverted his gaze to the parchment in his hands. Ahem, since Heavenly King Cepheus is in closed-door cultivation to reach the peak of the Sovereign of Reality's realm, the Council has requested you show the promising disciples to the Eternal Library. Elder Vortexian let out a long groan. Annoying. Sorry. Dealing with those brats is annoying. Elder Vortexian waved the man away. Get one of my personal disciples to show them instead. But these are the top 100 youths of Spatial Peak. If they don't receive the techniques hidden in the Eternal Library, they may fall behind Lunar or Dream Peak. Elder Vortexian snorted, as if Spatial Peak can never fall out of favor since one of the 4 Heavenly Kings lords over it. That is true, but Heavenly King Cepheus hasn't exited closed-door cultivation since he created the Eternal Library Pocket Realm. The man said in a whisper, some fear he may not have succeeded his ascension and may be crippled in some rift in space somewhere. Elder Vortexian slammed the desk and rose to his full height, scaring the life out of the fool who bothered him. If you speak one more word of doubt against a Heavenly King, I will feed you to his pets that guard the library. Do I make myself clear? Why yes, Elder Vortexian. The man threw himself into a 90-degree bow. Please accept my deepest apologies. Whatever. Elder Vortexian walked past the man. Just bring these so-called promising disciples to the Dimension Gate in the main hall and enough spatial spirit stones to compensate for my loss. His loose blue robe swished around his form as he walked down the grand hallway of his pavilion. From behind, he heard that useless servant call out about putting in a request with the treasury regarding his payment. Does that useless council think dimension travel is a cheap affair? Just activating that gate created by Heavenly King Cepheus will cost me a week of chi despite my monarch realm cultivation. If they don't compensate me with a mountain of spatial spirit stones, I will take them from the treasury myself. Reaching the end of the corridor and feeling lazy, Elder Vortexian vanished from his pavilion and entered his inner world. An endless expanse spread out all around him, and by simply drifting a few meters to the side, he exited his inner world and found himself miles away from his home on Spatial Peak and was now standing before one of the many dimension gates. I wonder when I should get around to making a pocket realm of my own. The only question is, what will its purpose be? The sect will pay me good money to make an educational one, like a training ground for the youth, but I would much rather create one to leave an inheritance behind. Elder Vortexian stroked his chin. Getting someone to build a temple filled with traps and riddles to make my inheritance seem more profound sounds expensive, though. How annoying. Soon, Elder Vortexian heard a gathering of people behind him, but they remained dead silent in his presence as none dared to interrupt his musing of useless things. This is how it should be. The loud ones don't deserve to enter the Eternal Library. Over an hour later, it seemed everyone had arrived, so Elder Vortexian turned to face 100 disciples of Spatial Peak, all wearing the dark blue robes of the inner clan. Everyone had similar features as they were one large family, but due to multiple political marriages, the Azure bloodline had thinned considerably over the years. Scanning the group, he could see a few pure blood scattered around, evident by their pale blue eyes and pointed ears. Esteemed disciples of Spatial Peak, Elder Vortexian said, and everyone hung on his every word. Behind me lies the dimensional gate to a pocket realm made by the legendary Heavenly King Cepheus. He paused for dramatic effect. It's thanks to his accumulation of knowledge in the Eternal Library that our great Spatial Peak is known throughout the realm as the peak of all spatial peaks. As promising youths of our clan already at the Star Core and Nascent Soul realm, you have been granted access to this place by the Council. Naturally, if I catch anyone defiling or causing trouble in the Eternal Library, you will be executed on the spot, no matter your affiliation to the clan. Everyone nodded. Good. Once inside, you may read as many technique manuals as you wish. However, none may be taken back with you. Elder Vortexian turned and placed his hand on the gate. Inserting some chi caused a portal to ripple into existence and a wave of power to rustle his clothes and push the disciples back a step. The gate is now open. Follow me. The portal rippled around Elder Vortexian, and he stepped into the Eternal Library and breathed in the all too familiar scent of wood and books. Looking up, he could see the top of the spire that rose up into the sky and housed the runic formation that kept the pets of Heavenly King Cepheus from coming in. A few of the disciples also stepped through behind him, and that is when he noticed the grand door that led outside of the library was slightly ajar. That's strange. There should be nobody else here, and it's forbidden to leave the library and bother the Heavenly King's pets. Elder Vortexian spread out his spiritual sense, and he immediately looked to the right, where he detected multiple life signs. A blonde girl who looked to be in her teens was leisurely sitting with her feet up on the desk, leaning back and reading a book in one hand while munching on a fruit in the other. Their eyes met, and she froze mid-bite. Their short staring contest was broken by the ring on her finger flashing with silver, and all the books stacked on the desk vanished inside. You dare. Elder Vortexian felt a blood vessel pop in his forehead from rage. He hadn't attacked straight away since the girl had a spatial affinity, so there was a chance she was authorized to be in here, but this disrespect warranted unquestioned execution. She had even brought her pets in here. A giant spider was reading a book beside her, with a legion of smaller spiders flipping the pages for it, and a bloated squirrel slept on her head. A wave of power went out as Elder Vortexian activated his domain. Within this purple hue, he had absolute command over his affinity and could manipulate reality to his will. Spatial lock, Elder Vortexian muttered, and he felt as if he had the girl's soul in the palm of his hand and unable to leave his grasp. It was one of the most famed techniques of the spatial peak of the Azure Clan. Now you stay right there, thief. Elder Vortexian grinned as the girl seemed totally frozen and unable to move. A sword of spatial chi appeared in his hand as he walked over. By the rules of the Azure Clan, I sentence you to death for disrespecting the eternal library that belongs to one of the 4 heavenly kings. A small yawn filled the frozen space as the squirrel awoke and looked around while lazily scratching its stomach. How can her pet move within my domain? Elder Vortexian felt something was terribly wrong. He focused his spiritual sense on the squirrel to try and discern its cultivation realm but could not. That thing is dangerous. I need to kill it first. Elder Vortexian wasted no time and activated multiple high-level techniques at once. Time dilation made his spatial step seem even faster as he slowed down time for everyone else within his domain. Reappearing beside the girl through a ripple of space, he tried to reach forward with chi-coated hands to crush the squirrel to death. The squirrel turned its head toward him with a bored look as if he were nothing but an annoying bug. The beast then yawned, and a mass of void tendrils exploded out of its tiny mouth, effortlessly consuming his arm. Elder Vortexian didn't even get time to blink before a life-saving artifact activated his spatial anchor, and he was pulled through space and time back to his stronghold under his pavilion. A second later, the pain of his missing arm registered, and he screamed out in agony. Stumbling through the dark room, he reached for a glowing ball upon a stone pedestal and pressed his remaining hand on it. A ghostly human appeared over the ball, and a hollow voice spoke to him. Elder Vortexian. What happened? Councilman. A girl was in the Eternal Library and attacked me. The ghostly figure seemed startled. Someone snuck into the Eternal Library. Impossible. It has been sealed, and the only entrance is in our heavily guarded clan hall. No monarch realm such as yourself could just walk in there. Elder Vortexian shook his head as he gripped his bloodied stump. The girl had a world wooker disguised as a pet squirrel. I fear the girl is some daughter from a realm far greater than ours who took an interest in the Eternal Library. A world wooker. The ghost seemed about to pass out from shock, as a pet. She also seemed to have tamed a royal-class ashen spider that was reading books. Elder Vortexian, are you joking? Do I look like I'm joking to you? I'm missing my arm, my spatial anchor got automatically activated before I could even react, and the promising disciples of our spatial peak are still inside. If they all die, our peak will be set back for generations to come. The ghost shouted off to the side at someone that Elder Vortexian couldn't see. Someone go awaken the Heavenly King. I don't care if he kills you for disturbing him. The spatial peak will honor your sacrifice. The ghost vanished, and the ball dimmed. Elder Vortexian collapsed to his knees, stared at the floor, and began to tremble. Just who had he offended? Was that blonde girl the daughter of some divine being who was bored? How did she even tame a world wooker? I'm doomed. He muttered as he huddled his legs. Stella took one more bite of the sweet-tasting language comprehension fruit under the gaze of 100 people. They were all clearly human, but some had weirdly vibrant blue eyes and pointed ears as they looked at her with disgust, contempt, and outright confusion. What did you do to Elder Vortexian? One of them shouted as they stepped forward. You talking to me? Stella pointed to herself. She didn't know of any Elder Vortexian. Was it the man who just suddenly vanished? Stella, run away. Maple whispered into her mind. I made the Monarch realm Elder flee, but there are many nascent soul people here. Ah. That's not good. Ahem, excuse me, members of the Azure Clan. Stella slowly stood up to not cause alarm, but I. Soul blind them and protect me. Stella closed her eyes and covered them with her hand as she dashed toward the door. Despite her precautions, everything went white. She then heard angered and confused shouts behind her as something furry scooped her up and charged forward. Recovering from her daze, she found herself on Larry's back with an exhausted and less fat Maple lying in the fur beside her. Soul was running behind them and hurling balls of light at the Azure Clan members. The spatial formation around the building blocks portals from forming, Stella shouted as Larry charged through the doors. They shouldn't be able to follow us for a few seconds. We just need to make it back to the bastion, and Tree might be able to save us from them. Stella, is there any chance of us escaping peacefully from them? Ashlock asked the girl who collapsed on the black stone of the bastion as he looked at the horde of blue-robed cultivators that were pointing at the bastion. No. Maple ate their elder's arm, and I stole many books. Stella said in a panic as she scrambled to her feet and summoned her sword. Tree, get ready. They will come any second. A clang rang out as a blue-robed man materialized before Stella and swung his sword at her. She only just managed to deflect the blow, but it sent her back a step. What? How did he get through the shield? Ashlock shouted in a panic as he activated Consuming Abyss, and a void lake spread out, which seemed to concern the man as he stepped back while eyeing it cautiously. The shield only blocks, Stella replied in her mind so the man wouldn't hear, and grunted as she parried another hit. External attacks. I can move through it just fine, so I assumed they could, too. Ashlock cursed as he sent hundreds of void tendrils at the man, but he simply spatial stepped away and avoided them with ease. Oh, you want to play that game? Ashlock calmed his mind and began to use chi resonance to disrupt their soul ripples. They seemed to notice the interference, and bands around their wrists glowed with power and began to automatically counter his attempts. Who are you? The man demanded as two others appeared beside him. And what did you do to the elder? Stella snorted. Your elder was a nuisance to me, so he was sent away. Ashlock noticed Stella's eyes begin to take on that relaxed and tranquil state. Her bloodline was activating. So, knowing that your elder was no match for me, have you come here to die? Stella fearlessly walked at them while swirling her sword. The man in the center with strange eyes and pointed ears, who Ashlock believed was in the nascent soul realm, actually took a slight step back as Stella walked toward him with void tendrils at her flank and an utterly calm look. Her bluffing was working. Kill the man in the middle, muttered, and all three of the Azure Clan intruders spatial stepped before Stella, but she effortlessly countered the man's attack and bent her body to avoid the other two whistling swords. All three of them went wide-eyed, and spatial stepped away before Ashlock could devour them with the void tendrils that curled around Stella's arms. Larry and Soul, I don't care for eating them. Push these bastards off the ship. Ashlock commanded. Stella might be capable of fighting them for a short while, but Maple was passed out, and there were multiple nascent soul Azure Clan people looking ready to teleport over. A beam of light illuminated the bastion as Soul blasted the man in the middle. To Ashlock's surprise, only the nascent soul's clothes suffered anything more than a slight burn, but the sudden attack seemed to spook the man enough for him to teleport away. The two that had joined him exchanged glances and vanished before Larry's wave of ash hit them. With them gone, Ashlock could focus on the outside. The spatial shield rippled around them, and the ship rocked slightly as space ripped and exploded around the bastion. The gathering of 100 spatial mages was unleashing everything in their arsenal at them, and Ashlock felt his chi being depleted from his main body at an ungodly rate. We need to leave, and fast. Ashlock cursed as he tried to make the bastion float away faster, but it was too slow. Willow, return fire while I come up with a solution, Ashlock said, and the tree acknowledged his order. All the large artillery plants blooming from the ship's sides lit up with spatial flames and began hurling black holes at the spatial cultivators. Let's see. Ashlock opened up all his system menus. He could improve the ship, maybe sign in with the points he had, or even activate a spatial storm. But none of those were real solutions. He needed to leave because if what Stella said about killing an elder was true, then more elders or even a grand elder of the Azure Clan may come through those doors any second, and when that happened, nowhere in this pocket realm would be safe. After all, if they had disciples on the same level as the patriarch of the Blood Lotus sect, he didn't wish to find out how strong their grand elder was. Wait, this entire ship is now part of Willow, the tree I am linked to. So if I was to use dimension overlap. Ashlock brought up the menu and decided it was the best way out. If he made a portal to Red Vine Peak, There was a chance these bastards would follow and wreak havoc. Bringing up the menu, he selected the one with the red clothes. Fire Chi Realm. Description: Blaze Titan Graveyard. Chi. Level: Star Core 2nd Stage. Environment: Treacherous. Monsters: True. Current occupants: 5. Pressing the free cost button, he felt the world twist around him. Dimensional overlap initiated. A moment later, everything went still. The Bastion, with everyone still on board, was floating over a burning hell, and up ahead, a Titan was engaged in an intense battle with a majestic man flying around on a sword of crimson flame. Chapter 205, Fire Titan. Despite the battle occurring up ahead between what Ashlock assumed were the Red Clothes and some strange Fire Titan, a feeling of relief washed over him. This was partly because he knew the chi level of this pocket realm was at the 2nd stage of the Star Core realm, meaning with the Grand Elder there, that Fire Titan shouldn't stand a chance. But it was also because they had escaped the Azure Clan due to his dimensional overlap skill. For now. I hope the Azure Clan cultivators don't have the capabilities of dimension travel. Ashlock desperately wished that being able to seamlessly overlap dimensions like he was with his system was something impossible for others. Otherwise, he was about to be hunted all the way to the lower layer of creation. Luckily, dimensional overlap worked as I expected with the Bastion. Ashlock had taken a gamble, and thankfully, it paid off. If Willow swapped realms and left everyone else stranded on a rock plummeting into the monster-infested expanse, he wouldn't know what to do. But it seemed that the dimensional overlap skill would move the Bastion and anyone or anything on it to wherever he wanted to go. Which made the fact they pushed those Azure Clan cultivators off at the last second even more important. Speaking of dimension shifting, Ashlock noticed that the chi consumption for the Bastion had increased exponentially since leaving the Spatial Chi realm. Since the Bastion's core was Spatial type, and they were in a pocket realm filled with nothing but fire chi, all of the chi required to power the ship was drawn solely from his main body rather than the surroundings. I should make a fleet of these Bastions out of the various groves I have back at home, so I have one specialized for every type of pocket realm, Ashlock mused as he turned off the shield and powered down the flower artillery. The purple bubble that had surrounded the Bastion faded away, and the flowers retreated back into the crevasses of the black stone ship. He would reactivate them when they got closer to the Titan. Larry's ash cloud casually rolled off the sides of the Bastion and sprinkled on the volcanic land below. Saul's light dimmed again, having used up all the chi Ashlock had charged him up with on the way to the building owned by the Azure Clan. In hindsight, it should have been somewhat obvious that a clan of cultivators would take notice if all the monsters were slaughtered in their sealed training realm, and then their very fancy-looking library guarded with runic formations got broken into. I don't know why, but I just assumed all of the pocket realms offered to me by the Mystic Realm skill would be abandoned like ancient temples with nothing but monsters, traps, and inheritances waiting to be claimed. Ashlock sighed. It would seem the Mystic Realm was far more dangerous than he first thought. A good thing we decided not to let the youngsters of the Redcliffe family in this time. If we ever let them in, I might guard them with a bastion or send them to a peaceful pocket realm that doesn't have a suspicious name. A moment passed as everyone on the ship calmed down and suffered under the sudden intense heat of this pocket realm. The lowered shield would have helped, but everyone here was strong enough to protect themselves, so it wasn't worth the chi waste. Are we safe? Stella asked as she sheathed her sword at her waist and rested her palm on its hilt. Purple flames flickered lazily across her body to ward off the heat. I believe so, Ashlock replied, for now at least. If one of the Azure Clan elders chases us, we would likely be doomed anyway without the help of Maple or one of his siblings. Stella's eyes widened as she reached up and carefully grabbed the passed-out Maple from her head. The poor thing looked like he was skin and bones now compared to his previously bloated and happy form. Ceased, Maple. Stella rubbed his fluffy head and tried to softly wake the squirrel. Eventually, Maple was awoken from his slumber and looked at Stella lethargically from within her palm. His head kept rolling to the side, so Stella propped it up with her fingers. Are you okay, Maple? Stella said in a hushed whisper to not scare him, you look terrible. I feel terrible, Maple replied. That elder was in the monarch realm and most certainly from an upper layer of creation. If I didn't go all out and surprise him, you would be dead. So the Azure Clan is from the second layer of creation, then. Ashlock concluded, and his mind shivered. How had they accidentally made an enemy out of such a group? To him, a nascent soul cultivator was a profound being that could lord over an entire demonic sect, but to the Azure Clan, they were just disciples. Meanwhile, An elder was on the same level as the world tree at the center of the celestial empire. Maple wheezed, I'm not strong enough yet to take such an existence on in a fair fight. If that elder's artifact didn't activate and drag him away after I devoured his arm, none of us would be talking right now. Thank you so much, Maple. I didn't even have time to react before I stared death in the face. Stella gave the little guy a hug against her cheek. Is there anything I can do for you? Soul could heal you. I used up all the energy I gathered from eating those tasty snakes earlier to unleash that attack. Maple licked his lips. That's why I look like this. If you got me a tasty snack, I would feel much better. Acorns? Stella asked while tilting her head. I need something with a bit more substance than an acorn, you silly human. Maple snorted and slothfully pointed at the titan in the distance whose fire lit up the entire area. I want to eat that. Okay, you just sit tight. Stella reached up and placed Maple carefully on her head. I will go hunt a titan for you. Thank you. Maple yawned and fell back asleep in the comfort of Stella's hair. What a glutton, Stella snorted as she plopped down against Willow. But he deserves it. So if he wants to eat a titan as a reward, that's fine. Say, Ash, how long till we get there? To the titan in the distance. Maybe an hour. Ashlock guessed based on the distance. Of course, once they got close, Stella could fly down on her sword if she wished. Alright, I guess I will read until then since cultivating here is impossible. Stella summoned a stack of books she had likely stolen from the library and began reading one of them. Reading? Who are you, and where is Stella? Ashlock joked. Stella looked up at Willow's canopy with annoyance. What are you implying? Since when did you willingly read? That's very uncharacteristic of you. The Stella I know would look at the book for a minute before chucking it to the side in favor of swinging her sword around. Bunny. Stella snorted and returned to her book with a pout. Keep that up, and I won't share them with you. Oh, don't be like that, Ashlock said as he used telekinesis to float the books and look through them. Finding one was titled Spatial Lock, a detailed guide. He grew excited and flipped through the pages. Sure enough, there was an entire section regarding chi resonance, which he skimmed over and gained some vague new insights into perfecting it. What really drew his focus was Chapter 2, titled Chi Disruption. Let's see what it says here. Once a bond is formed through chi resonance, the cultivator can disrupt the spatial chi flow of the target. By doing this, they effectively lock the spatial dimensions around the target. Ashlock flicked through some diagrams and other stuff, but that was essentially all the book was willing to tell him. Why do these cultivators absolutely suck at just writing down concise instructions? Ashlock grumbled as he tried to read the book upside down as if he would decipher some hidden meaning. They make me appreciate those overpriced textbooks on Earth so much more. Stop speaking in riddles, and just tell me a step-by-step guide. God darn it. Deciding to skip to the third and final chapter of the book to see if it would shed some more light, he read the content aloud. Chapter 3. Binding the space. The space around the target is confined, making it rigid and unyielding. This prevents the target from manipulating it, much like how a bird can't fly if trapped in a cage, even though it can do so. Ashlock put the book down and mulled over the words. He had noticed that spatial chi often moved in ripples and that reality was ever-changing around him. So, would making space rigid allow him to stop someone from forming portals and escaping? Hey Stella, Ashlock whispered in her mind. Yeah. She replied absent-mindedly. I can see you staring blankly at the contents page. There's no need to pretend you're reading. Stella clicked her tongue and closed the book shut. It's just a load of nonsense. How can anyone learn anything from these? I find myself asking the same thing. If you aren't going to read them, can I take all the books with me back to Red Vine Peak? Stella sighed and chucked the book she had been reading onto the pile. Take them. I can't understand a word anyway, and they give me a headache. Thank you kindly. Ashlock chuckled as he opened a portal that led back to Red Vine Peak and floated the books through. He would read those later once his time ran out here in the Mystic Realm. Actually, how long do I have? Time till sundown 5:30. Oh. Only 5 hours left, so around a full day here. Ashlock sighed. It had been a fun time so far. Should be long enough to go kill that titan and maybe hop over to give Kaida or someone a visit before I head home. He had always been a shut-in, willing to stay home for weeks at a time back on Earth, but seeing the same scenery every day in this world had worn him down more than he thought. He must have been the first spirit tree to experience the thrill of adventure, and he enjoyed it. Hey, Ash, Stella said while gazing through the portal at Red Vine Peak. Hum. Couldn't I go through that portal and then re-enter the Mystic Realm and select a new pocket realm to cultivate in since the last one was full of those Azure Clan bastards? I still want to cultivate and practice some new techniques this round, so I don't fall behind the others. That was an interesting observation and something he hadn't thought about. He had planned to get Stella to another pocket realm suitable for her after he had made sure the Azure Clan couldn't follow, but he got sidetracked by the books. Yeah, you should be able to do that, Ashlock replied, or I can spend some of my energy and send you to a more specific pocket realm of your choosing. He did have 2,300 sacrificial credits he hadn't spent yet, and he felt terrible that Stella had basically been forced from hers and was now spending chi to stay in this pocket realm of Hellfire. Stella shook her head and closed her eyes. No, it's okay, Tree. Just wake me up when we get closer to the Titan, and then after getting Maple his snack, I will go back into the Mystic Realm. Any shard that calls to me will be a good one. Well, the offer is always there if you want it, Ashlock replied. Enjoy your rest, though. Stella yawned. Reading books makes me so sleepy. Grand Elder, this thing just won't die. Elder Mo shouted as he leapt from the Titan's shoulder and landed on the Grand Elder's flying sword. I have slashed at its head multiple times with my spirit fire, but I meet nothing but charred meat and flames. I believe it's pulling in chi from somewhere else, the Grand Elder replied as he casually directed his flying sword to dip under the Titan's hand that was attempting to smack them out of the sky. We have been attacking it in shifts all day, and no matter what we do, it heals and never moves from that spot. Perhaps a formation lies below, and this is a guardian for some inheritance or tomb. Elder Mo grumbled behind him. I sure hope so. We have wasted what? 2 days now on trying to down this thing. Let's try for one more day and then leave if it remains standing, the Grand Elder said as he flew out of the known range of the monster and over to a gray outcrop. Behind it, he spotted the rest of his family cultivating in silence. As the only one at the Star Core realm here, only he could fly up to the Titan and try attacking its weak points, assuming it had any. Assault from the ground had been called off after the first round as the Titan had almost stamped Amber to death as if she were a fly. Elder Margaret, it's your turn, the Grand Elder said calmly with his hands behind his back as the sword hovered a meter off the ground, and Elder Mo jumped down to rest and recover his chi. I just broke through to the 9th stage, Elder Margaret said as she stood up, but I don't know how much help I will be. The Grand Elder followed Elder Margaret's confused gaze and saw something in the sky. Riding on a storm of rippling space was a strange black rock surrounded by a shield of spatial chi. A roar shook the land as the strange object entered the Titan's attack range and was engulfed by a fireball the size of a sun. The spatial shield surrounding the rock rippled and easily shrugged off the flames, and to the Grand Elder's surprise, the floating rock returned fire with balls of condensed spatial chi ripping through the air and smashing the Titan in the torso. Giant holes formed in the Titan as the many black holes sucked away its flames, leaving only the charred flesh with nothing to heal it. What in the 9 realms is that rock thing? Elder Mo shouted as the Titan fell to one knee. That firepower is insane. Only the gods know. The Grand Elder muttered as he squinted and saw plants along the ship's side ablaze with spatial chi before they all recoiled, and another barrage of black holes ripped through reality and smashed into the Titan, finishing it off. The ground trembled as the Titan face-planted the molten land. A being that had seemed immortal and that they had been fighting for 2 days straight was wiped out by an unknown entity within a minute. Wait, is that Mistress Stella? Elder Margaret said as she pointed to the floating black rock. Following her finger, the Grand Elder saw a blonde-haired girl standing on a sword of purple flames descending toward the Titan. She was traveling fast and soon went behind the rock outcrop they were hiding behind. Elder Margaret, let's go check it out, the Grand Elder said as he moved his flying sword toward the Titan. Sure enough, once they arrived, he saw Stella standing there beside the corpse with someone else. Is that Maple in his human form? The white fluffy tail that curled around his body and the squirrel ears on his head gave him clues, but he swore Maple was shorter than he remembered. Oh, Grand Elder, Stella said casually as he landed beside them. Apologies for stealing your kill, but Maple here wanted a snack. No worries, this guy is just some small fry, the Grand Elder laughed it off, but I must say this Titan doesn't look very tasty as a snack. A snack? This thing would be enough to feed a city, and we fought it for 2 days, but it's just a snack to Maple. How did they even get here, and what the hell is that floating rock? Maple walked forward barefoot on the molten ground and touched the Titan. His hand exploded into a mass of wiggling tendrils that devoured the Titan like a pack of starved snakes, and after a minute, Maple let out a burp and the Titan was gone. He had somehow eaten it all and even grown a little taller. Feeling better? Stella asked as she patted Maple on the head and played with his ear. Yes, much better, Maple replied, but the Grand Elder heard Maple's words directly in his mind, which made him shiver. Great. Stella smiled and grabbed his hand. We will be on our way then, Grand Elder. I wish you good luck. Sure. The Grand Elder said absent-mindedly as he watched the pair fly back up to the floating rock. Moments later, reality twisted as if the rock collapsed into a single point and vanished. They were gone, just like that. The Grand Elder let out a defeated sigh as he turned to survey the landscape, but then his interest was piqued when he noticed a staircase heading underground where the Titan's foot had been. Chapter 206, Interlude, Cultivating Nothingness. Elaine found herself alone, floating in the void. One moment, she had been with the others gathered around the smaller demonic tree in that strange celestial fog with pocket realms trapped in shards of glass floating by. But now she was here. Wherever here was supposed to be. Maple's sibling had brought her here after only a few words. She glanced around at the total nothingness and fear gnawing at her mind, yet her soul felt oddly comfortable. It was only now that Elaine realized what true nothingness really was and what the void actually entailed despite cultivating void chi her whole life. There was no light or shadows, no sound or colors. No sense or feelings. No wind or distant chirps. No clouds, sky, sea, land, or even air. Just nothing. In all directions until eternity. Elaine wasn't even sure if there was time in this place. What could have been hours or minutes passed, but with nothing but her spiraling thoughts as a reference, there was no way to tell. Strange, isn't it? Mars materialized in front of her. To be deprived of all senses and stimuli, to experience true nothingness. Elaine gulped as she looked into Mars's inhuman eyes. Yes. It's oddly comforting, though. My soul feels at peace. As it should. You are a young voidling, after all. This is your home, your birthplace. It's where you belong. What does being a young voidling mean exactly? Elaine asked. You called me that earlier before bringing me here. Wherever here is. Are we in a pocket realm? Mars shook their head. As I mentioned, there are no pocket realms of void chi because how can you create something like a pocket realm out of nothingness? Tell me, what is chi? I have no idea. Elaine stammered. It was such an open-ended question she froze up. Chi was everything. How could she describe such a thing in a sentence? It was like asking what is reality. Let me explain from the beginning then, Mars said flatly. Heaven is simply a force of change. Before the heavens, there was the void, and it was only through the heavens will for change that reality was woven into existence. We call the manifestation of heaven's will chi. When cultivators meditate on the heavens will and become able to wield chi, they can enact change on their environment. Creating crimson flames, powerful tornadoes, or even devastating earthquakes. It's only through manifesting heaven's will that cultivators can cause this change in the reality that has been woven for them. Elaine nodded slowly. I see. But what is void chi then? Void is the absence of else. When one cultivates void chi, they cultivate the absence of chi rather than a type of chi itself. Mars explained, it's why void chi is so hard to come by when you are suffocated by reality. When everything around you is constructed by heaven's will. Only through cracks in this woven reality can you catch a glimpse of true nothingness that sneaks through, which is what your soul yearns for. True nothingness. Mars drifted closer and placed their hand on her shoulder. It felt like nothing. There was no texture, weight, or feeling to the grip. That is why I call you a young ignorant voidling. You are one of us, something born outside of heaven's touch. An anomaly that shouldn't exist within heaven's carefully woven reality. I don't understand. Elaine felt like crying. What did Mars mean she shouldn't exist? How can I be a voidling? I'm a human, aren't I? Do I look human? Mars asked while tilting their head. Their eyes transitioned from total darkness to normal human eyes with pupils that almost looked pretty. They smiled, but it felt forced and fake, like a monster wearing a human's face as a mask and trying to fit in. I guess. Elaine replied hesitantly. What about now? Mars's face melted away to reveal a single giant red eye that stared right at her. Elaine gulped. No. How can you be so sure you are human then? What makes you human? Mars poked her in the chest. Does this fleshy vessel your soul resides in define you? If I took your soul and implanted it into a monster's body, would you still be human? You still think and act the same, just in a new body. Elaine diverted her gaze to her feet as looking into that grotesque eye that had been hidden behind a visage of a human face irked her out. So all that matters is my soul, not the body surrounding it? Elaine asked. Exactly. Appearance is the worst thing to base somebody on. Always look at their soul. Mars put their finger under her chin and forced her to look into the eye. The soul never lies, and that's why I call you a voidling. Your soul is like mine. So, can I change my body like you? Elaine asked. Mars drifted backward. Not now. You are too weak for such a thing. Only those in the nascent soul realm and above can comprehend the deepness of a soul and change their fleshy vessel at will. Ah. Elaine's shoulders drooped. My family is cursed. Nobody has reached the nascent soul realm. Mars laughed. You aren't cursed. Your family is simply foolish and looking at the void in the wrong way. Elaine's eyes widened. Are you saying there's a way I can form a nascent soul? Nothing is impossible. You just need to have the will to shape your reality. Mars waved their hand. Come, look at this, and you will understand. Suddenly, everything changed. The void was no longer empty. Elaine wasn't sure how, but she was now gazing up at a stack of progressively larger disks surrounded by a celestial fog. You see that tiny realm down there? Mars pointed to the small disk below them. It's breathtakingly beautiful, Elaine muttered. That's the 9th layer of creation. The place you call home. Mars then pointed at the disk overhead, and that larger realm is the 8th layer of creation. Elaine noticed that. Between the two realms was a sort of void that was filled with the same celestial fog of shattered realities as the mystic realm. Why is the 9th layer so small compared to the others? Elaine asked as she noticed something below it. There was what could only be described as a wasteland below the 9th layer with strange black monoliths reaching up. The heaven's will and authority grows weaker the further down you go, so the layer of creation size reflects this with less overall chi poured into each layer's creation. Mars said and then seemed to notice Elaine's gaze on the wasteland, that is the demon realm, also known as hell. It's where chi, which has become corrupted, gathers, and abominations are born. As chi flows down the layers from the heavens above, eventually it will fall beyond heaven's reach, and that is the result. So it's like a waterfall. Elaine murmured as she gazed up at the stack of realms overhead. Chi flows down from the top and makes its way to the bottom. But I don't understand. How does this show me that my family isn't cursed? You see how reality is a self-contained system under heaven's control? Mars asked. Elaine nodded. Well, my young voidling, we belong out here in the nothingness of the void, outside of heaven's influence. Mars spread out their arms and gestured around. Yet you ask me why you can't ascend when you are trapped in there. If you don't play by heaven's rules, don't expect the heavens to smile upon you. Can you say it more simply? Elaine sighed. Mars drifted closer and rammed a finger into her chest near her heart. Your soul can contain something it should not. The void. When you cultivate under the heavens, you are coming to an understanding with the force of change and learning to wield it yourself. How can the heavens create an infant soul out of something even it can't contain? Remember, there are no pocket realms of void chi. Elaine's eyes widened. So you are saying the reason nobody in my family has formed a nascent soul isn't because we are cursed but because the heavens cannot help us shape a new soul out of the void? Mars nodded. There's no such thing as a void cultivator in the upper realms, to my knowledge. How your family exists, and any of them even cultivated to the soul fire realm, is baffling. As I said, you are an anomaly that shouldn't exist within heaven's carefully woven reality. So what should I do? Elaine asked. How can I overcome this issue and ascend? Two options, Mars said as they raised two fingers. The first option is to reform your soul out here and learn to cultivate like world walkers do outside the constricted system of defined realms of power. This means you will no longer hit the nascent soul bottleneck, as we never form one. We just grow continuously stronger by consuming chi. So, world walkers grow stronger as they eat away at heaven's carefully woven reality. Just like monsters and demons. Why do you think we are enslaved by heaven from birth and barred from setting foot on their realms? Mars showed their teeth. Endless power without bottlenecks comes at a price. Heaven knows that voidlings like you and I threaten its existence, so if you follow our path, you will suffer the same fate as us and be exiled. I see. So what is the second option? You can stay within the heavens system and play by its rules. Elaine did feel comfortable out here. As if the constant pressure of the world wasn't pressing down on her soul at all times. But it was also eerily quiet and dull. Despite the vast space before her, this felt more like a prison than the ninth layer of creation below her feet. So what will it be? Want to stay out here and become a world walker? I would rather be down there with my friends if possible. Elaine pointed to the realm below. So how can I advance within the heavens system with my void chi? The simple answer is you can't, Mars said. So what do I do? Hold on, let me finish. Yes, advancement with void chi may be impossible, but who said you couldn't cultivate another type of chi? Just become a dual affinity and play by heaven's rules with void chi on the side. That's possible. Elaine was baffled. Dual affinities are rare, and I thought you basically had to be born as one. Mars shook their head. There are many ways to acquire another affinity, and of course, it has its downsides. Cultivating two affinities at once dramatically slows down a cultivator's progress and can cause other issues. But those downsides are infinitely better than being stuck at the peak of the star core realm forever, wouldn't you agree? Absolutely, Elaine agreed. So how do I get this second affinity? Oh, I can do it for you, Mars said casually as they thrusted their hand into Elaine's chest and pulled out nothing. But Elaine knew that her soul rested in their palm. Elaine shivered. How can you do that? I'm a world walker, overlord of the void. Mars gave an inhuman smile that reached their ears. Pulling a void soul out of a voidling is an easy feat. Okay. Now what? Elaine had studied everything about chi known to those on the lower realm of creation, so to have everything she thought true turned on its head by this world walker made her exhausted. This is the fun part. Usually, a dual affinity comes with the issue of two chi types competing against one another within a person's soul. But void chi is the absence of anything, so it's the perfect dual affinity as it will work with anything. Mars gestured around. Imagine your soul is like the void we find ourselves in now. Now look at the realms of creation that represent the other affinities you can pick. Pick. Elaine opened her mouth in surprise. I get to pick what dual affinity I want? Sure, why not? Mars tilted their head. We have all of creation before us. All we have to do is condense a strand of any chi type you wish within your void soul and then foster and cultivate it into a nascent soul and, in turn, give you a second affinity. Elaine had not expected today to go like this at all. She had always felt weak and behind everyone else, grasping at the faintest hints of void chi around her, but now she was being offered the opportunity of a lifetime. She's getting to pick what affinity she wants. So what will it be, my little voidling? Mars said flatly as if it weren't the most exciting thing ever. Fire, earth, wind, water, light, darkness, lunar, metal, space, divine. Even cosmic chi is possible. How can I possibly decide something just like that? Elaine was overwhelmed. This had to be the hardest decision any cultivator had faced in the history of reality. Don't worry, Mars said casually, you have all the time in the world. There's no time chi in the void after all. Chapter 207, Interlude, Taos of Reality. Well, if we have all the time in the world, do you mind if I ask you some questions? Elaine asked. You have opened my eyes to my lack of knowledge, and I can't make such a big decision with incorrect assumptions taught to me by the ignorant. Sure, go ahead, Mars said as neutrally as the void that surrounded them. Elaine took no offense to this disinterested and slightly condescending tone, as this was how Mars had spoken so far. Whether it was because they were clearly not human and lacked such insignificant things as emotions or Mars was doing it on purpose didn't matter. Elaine knew her place in this vast reality, and it was most certainly below this person before her. What should I ask Mars first? Elaine pondered as she looked at the floating person before her. The researcher within her had 1,001 questions she wanted to ask all at once, but many were just her musings on the vastness and big questions of reality. Those can wait. What I need is all the information directly related to chi and Taos. Oh. Also, the advantages and disadvantages of each affinity and, how pocket realms work and such. How exciting. Stop thinking and start asking. Mars said, questions lead to answers, and those answers will lead to more questions. No need to bog yourself down in spiraling thoughts. Elaine snapped out of her daze and realized that without the feeling of time passing, she could have been thinking for hours for all she knew. It wouldn't be the first time. But usually, the hunger pains or dimming light from the sun setting in her office would bring her back to reality. Sorry about that, Elaine gave an awkward smile. As for my first question, you mentioned there is no time chi out here in the void. What do you mean by that? Time is a concept and, in a way, the underlying mechanism by which reality operates. Without time, Things cannot move forward or backward. Organisms cannot be born and grow old. Rocks cannot be eroded away by a rushing river, and people cannot learn from the past. Mars said wistfully, but the void lies outside of that. There is no reality here and, therefore, no need for time. Nothing grows or dies here. There are no passing seasons or celestial objects to provide sunlight during the day and moonlight by night. There is simply nothing here, including the passing of time. I see, Elaine pondered, so do you not age mentally or physically? Mars's face reformed over the giant eye, and they gave her a small smile. If I wish to grow stronger, learn new things about the reality of the heavens, and mature mentally as a being, I have to go over there. They pointed to the celestial fog containing the pocket realms lying between the layers of creation. By drifting through that fog and absorbing the ambient chi I grow. Whereas if I stay out here, I will remain stagnant in all ways. Elaine looked out at the vastness of reality. She knew trying to cultivate all the different chi types would be impossible, as that would put her on the same level as the heavens, but if it was just something like time, then surely. So if time is the underlying mechanism of reality, wouldn't it be the best affinity to choose? With it, I could affect everything else. No. No. Elaine blinked. Why not? Do you understand what it means to understand a Tao and how it differs from Qi? Mars asked. Elaine did have some ideas, but she would much rather let Mars explain than look more foolish than she already felt. I understand on a basic level, but could you explain it? Since reality is woven together, there are no defined lines between things, and often concepts or Qi types begin to blend together. Mars spread out their arms. Imagine a river. It's easy to look at one from afar, and a person may be able to understand what a river is at a surface level. But what about what lurks beneath the surface and the underlying mechanics of how a river flows? Gravity makes it move, bits of sediment and minerals dissolved in the water, its temperature, the plant life, and fish swimming within. All of these various parts are what makes that river what it is. Despite there being nothing between Mars's arms, Elaine felt like she was hallucinating a river just by the vivid description. Was it because of the void robbing all her senses that made the imagery so real? In this example, the river would be a type of Qi, whereas the things that make up the river are the underlying Taos. Mars explained, for someone to wield this river Qi, they would need to have some understanding of all that a river encompasses in order to command it. I see. So if someone only knew the Tao of, let's say, gravity, they could affect and understand the river Qi somewhat but ultimately be unable to wield it in its entirety and only affect that one part. Elaine hypothesized. Mars nodded. Precisely. Imagine there is a vaguely defined pyramid of Qis, with some lording over others. Those that encompass more Taos are higher up the pyramid but harder to cultivate and reach enlightenment in, as when a cultivator tries to listen to the heavens whispers, there will be many Taos attempting to impart their knowledge of reality at once. But this is just my theory and way of viewing things. As I said, reality is so woven together that such a defined hierarchy is impossible. So would you say something like solar Qi sits higher than light Qi? Elaine asked. Yes, Mars nodded. Solar Qi encompasses many Taos, such as light, heat, radiation, life, and more. Whereas light Qi is much more focused on the light Tao part and what that entails. Another example would be how water Qi sits higher than ice or mist Qi, which are far more specialized. Elaine rubbed her chin. So what you are suggesting is that time Qi is a bad choice due to how high it's up the pyramid. Yes, because to revert or fast forward time, even in a small area, requires an absolute understanding of everything and enough Qi to rewrite reality to a past or future state. Mars let out a very slight laugh. Something like that lies in the realm of heaven and the gods, and even they might be under the stranglehold of time's power. Elaine's eyes widened. Now that you put it like that, even if the gods had the power over time, it would be terrifying. I mean, if they wanted, they could put all of us in an endless loop or cycle. How would anyone even reach the higher planes if that happened? That wouldn't even be fair. Yeah. That would be terrible. Mars seemed to look away as if to avoid eye contact. Oh okay, I can see why you reacted like that now. Elaine nodded to herself and decided to ignore the void monster's odd behavior. So if time Qi is the lord of all, I would assume affinities such as cosmic or divine are just below it. Would you recommend either? I believe they are both far below time Qi in the number of Taos they encompass, but I certainly wouldn't recommend either. Divine Qi means to comprehend the divine laws of heaven. One of its main advantages is immunity to the void, which you sort of already have by cultivating void Qi. Interesting, what else can it do? Elaine asked. Well, it would let you cultivate endlessly until the highest realm, and you would be able to also wield the powers of heaven to a degree. But Mars winced. Elaine raised a brow. So infinite cultivation potential and the ability to wield the power of the gods. What's the catch? Mars smiled faintly. You would be enslaved to the heavens and under its constant watch and control. I know I said to play by its rules, but that's different from being enslaved to them. If the heavens commanded you to kill Ashlock, you would do so. If they wanted you dead, you would do so gladly. All for the glory of the heavens. Elaine shuddered. That sounds terrible. Why do you think we, as worldwalkers, wish to escape heaven's rule? Mars bared their teeth. We don't even cultivate the divine, yet we are commanded by it to an extent. Never mind about divine chi, then. What's wrong with cosmic? Ever heard the saying it's harder to create than destroy? Cosmic is what I would define as a creation type of chi. A creation type. Don't they just absorb chi and use it? What are they creating? Elaine was fascinated. Knowledge of cosmic chi was tightly guarded by the Star Weaver family. Cosmic chi comes from the distant stars, so much like void chi it requires formations to capture it in any significant amounts. Furthermore, it takes a truly stupendous amount of chi to create a cosmos inside your soul and then even more to actually nurture and weaponize it. Chi intensive. Got it. But even so, wouldn't cosmic plus void affinity make me a deadly force? Elaine asked. Something about cultivating a literal cosmos inside her soul was fascinating, but she also shuddered at how many Daos she would have to comprehend on top of the many years she would have to spend diligently cultivating to keep up even with all the help from Ashlock. The reason I advise you against cosmic affinity is that void chi is already such a chi-intensive affinity that if you had both void and cosmic, you would be a one-hit wonder. Able to decimate a foe and then out of action for weeks to regain what you spent. Mars said casually, of course, if that is what you desire, blasting people with void-coated cosmic radiation is an attack that is nigh unstoppable. I see, Elaine muttered as she fell deep into thought. What did she want? Seeing her thinking, Mars added, in my opinion, it would be better for you to pick a simpler and easier to cultivate one that matches your personality and works well with void affinity. Alright, Elaine hummed as she pondered. What makes void chi so intensive, by the way? I understand creating a literal cosmos inside one's soul, but absolute nothingness. Why is cultivating it so hard? Mars looked off into the vast expanse of nothingness. When you cultivate void chi, you are effectively stripping all the Daos from reality and returning it to nothingness. Destruction is many times easier than creation, but even so, void chi is closer to time on the pyramid than cosmic or divine. You only find it as easy to cultivate as you do because you are a being born from the void. As a voidling, it's like breathing to you. So void is a destructive affinity. The best there is, Mars said. Turns out being able to deconstruct a carefully woven reality makes you rather powerful. Shields of any type are obliterated in equal measure. Travel is easy and instantaneous, as you can rip space apart. You can block anything and avoid all kinds of detection. But all of this comes at a significant cost. So your second affinity should be less chi-intensive if possible. Elaine knew that significant cost that Mars spoke about well enough. After all, she was in her mid-20s and still hadn't surpassed the first stage of the soul fire realm despite her efforts. There were no whispers of heaven with void chi to provide enlightenment, and the actual void chi was rare and near impossible to cultivate without the help of vast and expensive chi-gathering formations. So, I should pick a cheaper affinity. Perhaps something like fire, water, wind, or earth. Elaine thought for a while but didn't like the sound of any of them. She was allowed to pick anything in existence as her second affinity, so to go with something so basic and restrictive just because it was cheap felt wrong. Something more mid-tier, then. One that has a few Daos to it but not so many that it's impossible to cultivate without the help of Ashlock's resources or a vast chi-gathering array. Okay, I'm just going to think aloud, and feel free to offer any thoughts, Elaine said. Mars gave her a nod, so she continued, void chi, when utilized to its maximum potential, lets me basically kill anything as I can force my way through any defense, right? I can even travel instantly with void step, and I can technically block anything, so I have perfect attack, movement, and defense. Don't forget you can remain totally undetectable from spiritual sense, Mars said. Right, so I sort of have stealth as well. Elaine tapped her chin, so something like darkness or spatial affinity would be unnecessary as they are basically cheaper to use but a lesser version of void. You can think of void as a more selfish version of those two, Mars mused. Void may allow you to traverse great distances instantly, but you can't bring others with you or attack through portals. Whereas darkness chi would let you blanket a room in total darkness that may aid your allies to escape, but you can't with void as that would be far too costly. Elaine nodded. Okay, so I need a mid-tier affinity encompassing a handful of Daos, which works well with the void and fits my fighting style. What is your fighting style? Mars asked. Elaine snorted. I don't have one. I'm a researcher, not a fighter. I have done some training, but I am rather hopeless with the sword and get surrounded and overwhelmed easily. But I should get better with practice. Not necessarily, Mars shook their head. Practice does indeed close the gap between you and others, but imagine how your life will look in a million years as you stand on an upper realm battlefield facing down a prodigy sword god. No amount of practice will allow you to win in the end because you may be able to change your fleshy vessel, but you can never change your soul. Lack of talent, then. Elaine sighed. Can't teach a fish to fly, Mars said flatly. Even if you gave that fish the body of an eagle, its soul would always yearn for the cold ocean depths rather than the blue skies. Some things are ingrained in our soul and personality no matter how many years go by. A sword prodigy will have come out of the womb wanting to fight and die by the blade. So, what do you suggest? Elaine asked. Should I go and discover my fighting style first and come back? No need. You already know deep down what you want. You just don't want to admit it. Elaine gulped as she stared the human-looking void monster in the face. Mars was right. She hated it, but they were right, darn it. I'm a coward. Elaine shouted. There, I said it. I don't want to fight. I would rather sit in the back and help where I can. Mars grinned, showing their teeth. There is more to fighting than clashing swords. What do you mean? Mars thrust a finger into her skull, and everything went black. The vast reality she had been staring at in the void was gone, and now she was surrounded by nothingness. Where am I? Elaine muttered as she desperately looked around. I isolated your mind from your body in a bubble of void chi. Mars's voice rippled through the darkness from all directions. Your body is right before me, staring off into space. I could ram a sword through your heart right now and end your pitiful existence. Please don't. An inhuman laugh rattled through her skull. I won't, but do you see my point? Sometimes attacking the mind or soul is better than going for the flesh and bone. Elaine felt reality return, and Mars drifted backward while lowering their hand. I didn't know my ignorance was so boundless, Elaine cursed. I was told from an early age that mind-based affinities like dream chi only worked on those far weaker, so few bother to cultivate them. That is true, Mars agreed, but when paired with void chi that can penetrate all defenses, even those around the mind and soul. Elaine suddenly had an idea for the affinity she wanted. Having her mind isolated, paired with the vivid imagery of the river from earlier, gave Elaine an affinity that seemed perfect. One that complemented the strengths of void chi while bringing something new to the table. And best of all, she knew Ashlock had a grove of flowers that produced the chi required for it. What about illusion chi? Elaine asked. It's a mid-tier affinity that, when paired with the void, becomes something far better. The fact that void chi lets me hide my presence would make it impossible to tell which version of me is real and which is fake. I could distract people, leaving them open to my void step and any further attack. It even lets me assist from the backlines in fights. Elaine didn't mention her next idea, but if she reached the point where she could isolate someone's mind in a bubble of void, she could create a totally fake reality within that person's mind, and they would have no idea she had even done anything to them. That level of power. Wasn't it close to the gods? A good choice. Do you know the Daos such an affinity includes? Mars asked. Elaine shook her head. Come with me, Mars said as they grabbed Elaine's hand and led her toward the nearby celestial fog. Shards of pocket realms drifted past, but Elaine felt no draw to any of them, just like before. If anything, her soul wanted to return to the quiet void rather than stay here. The Daos an illusionist must understand to truly fool someone or light to create visual illusions. Mars reached into a nearby pocket realm and pulled free a tiny wisp of light that they held in their palm, the Tao of sound and wind to trick someone's senses, the Tao of mind to trick their brain, the Tao of darkness to give contrast to the light, the Tao of spatial to bend reality, and finally the Tao of nature to manipulate and even mirror a natural environment. Elaine watched in awe as the wisps of various Daos were gathered and then merged together in Mars's hand. The result was translucent chi that shimmered like a mirage. And this is illusion chi. Mars said flatly as they showed it to Elaine, the combination of many Daos involved in manipulating reality and people's minds. So what will it be? Do you choose this to be your second affinity? Elaine spent a good while staring at Mars's hand. She thought long and hard if there was another type of chi she would prefer, but eventually, the excitement from all the scenarios she thought up won out. It truly felt like it fit her. I do. Mars grinned, this might hurt a little. They wasted no time and rammed the illusion chi into Elaine's soul. She screamed. The pain was soul-wrenching, like someone had taken an axe to her very being and carved it in two. Sorry about this. Elaine could hardly hear Mars over her screaming from the pain of having her soul ripped apart, having a new affinity stuffed inside, and then her soul being put back together again. Once her soul had been reformed, she felt the illusion chi begin to bloom and intertwine with the void of her soul. What did you do to me? Elaine gasped as she felt her soul had shrunk drastically and she couldn't even summon any soul flames to her hand. Oh, I'm going to need you to cultivate from scratch again because otherwise, the void of your soul would reject the new illusion chi. This way, it will be as if you were born with illusion chi all along. Mars said enthusiastically. Elaine grunted in response and blacked out. Chapter 208, Divine Flesh. Ashlock didn't want to stay in the Blaze Titan graveyard a moment longer. There was simply no reason for him to be here other than to get Maple a snack and briefly check on the Red Clothes to see if they were doing fine. That Titan was weaker than I thought it would be. The Red Clothes must have weakened it significantly. Ashlock hummed as he watched the Red Clothes group around a staircase that seemed to lead somewhere. Or perhaps the Bastion's firepower is greater than I thought. It is an SSS grade skill. The spatial bubble around the Skyborn Bastion rippled as Stella pushed through with Maple in his squirrel form on her head. Maple was looking fuller of life than before. Fighting the Elder from the Azure Clan had taken much out of the Eldritch Squirrel, so Ashlock was glad to see he was back to his usual self. Can you send me back to Red Vine Peak now? Stella asked as she rocked on her heels and looked rather excited. It would seem after a quick nap, Stella's fear of facing down a Monarch Realm Elder from a higher layer of creation had worn off, and her lust for power had returned. Sure, give me a second, Ashlock replied as he split his attention back to his main body on Red Vine Peak and conjured a portal via his roots connected through time and space, thanks to his new SSS-grade Skyborn Bastion skill. Thanks, Stella said as she walked through the portal. Ashlock switched his view to Red Vine Peak and saw her teleport across the peak and step back into the Mystic Realm, all while having Maple sleeping on her head. Larry, you should head back as well, Ashlock said to the giant spider, and he also mentally commanded Soul to return as well. There were still threats lurking near his home, and he wanted them ready to defend it at the drop of a leaf. As you wish, my master, Larry said gruffly as he crawled through the portal with Soul following closely behind. With nothing but Willow remaining on the bastion, Ashlock brought up his dimensional overlap skill menu and waited for it to update with Stella's new pocket realm. As expected, the Azure Clan pocket realm has vanished from the free options since none of us are there anymore, Ashlock noted as he clicked through the other options and confirmed nothing had changed with Douglas or Kaida's pocket realms. Everything seemed to be going fine for them. I hope they haven't stumbled into some non-abandoned pocket realm like we did, Ashlock sighed. They had only survived an assault from the Azure Clan by the bark of his trunk due to Maple going all out and burning all the energy he had gathered from the feast and Ashlock unlocking his new SSS grade skill. Without either of those things, they would likely all be dead. We also would have died if Willow didn't have spatial affinity, Ashlock mused, another reason I want to leave this fire chi pocket realm as soon as possible. The Bastion spatial chi shield consumed more of my main body's chi due to that fireball from the Titan than the combined efforts of those higher layer Azure Clan cultivators. This discovery further cemented Ashlock's idea of turning the groves back home into bastions as well. After another minute, a new option appeared at the top of the list in his dimensional overlap skill menu. Clicking on it, he confirmed that Stella had gone into a new pocket realm by re-entering the Celestial Fog. Spatial Chi Realm. Description: Grand Spatial Array. Chi Level: Star Core 4th Stage. Environment: Peaceful. Monsters: None. Current Occupants: 2. Good choice, Stella. This pocket realm seems far more chill than the last one. Sadly, the spatial chi in this one is lower than the last, so it won't benefit me as much as the last pocket realm. Ashlock mulled, but with only a few hours left on my time here, that's not so bad. Ugh, but there are no monsters for me to kill for credits. But I do have over 2,000 ready to be used, so I shouldn't be so greedy. Dismissing his thoughts and selecting the free button, Ashlock felt reality twist around him as the bastion shifted dimensions. The beautiful feeling of spatial chi washed over him as he surveyed the surroundings. Down below, sitting crossed-legged on a floating island of lush purple grass covered in silvery runes that looked in disrepair, was Stella. Her eyes were closed, and her hair bloated upwards as a spatial vortex was gathered from the surroundings and funneled into her. Alright, compared to the last place, this pocket realm looks abandoned, Ashlock concluded as he moved the bastion to check out the rest of this pocket realm while also absorbing the abundant chi all around. The name Grand Spatial Array worried me, but I don't see any signs of life or civilization on any of the other floating islands in this place. Much like the last spatial pocket realm, reality was all out of whack here, with the space bending and curving around the islands as if they had immense gravity like black holes, and there were random tears in the sky here and there. But the lack of grotesque monsters with shifting limbs, titanic snakes lurking below an expanse, and a painfully out-of-place giant blue building that looked well cared for were all good signs to Ashlock. She should be far safer here. Ashlock sighed as he couldn't even convince himself. The island's chi-gathering array did look abandoned, but maybe the owner was just lazy and didn't care for it. There were no certainties in this world, especially regarding the mystic realm. Should I leave her some more protection? I could bring Titus over as he will be strongest in this spatial realm. Would that be enough? Maybe I should also bring Sol over in case she gets injured while practicing her sword. Ashlock decided that would be for the best, so he summoned a portal and told Titus and Sol to come through. You two stay out of Stella's way while she cultivates but protect her life through any means necessary if required and listen to any instructions she has for you, Ashlock instructed. Do I make myself clear? The Ints couldn't talk, but they both seemed to understand. Ashlock appreciated the lingering human intellect left in the Ints and sent them on their way. The two Ints jumped down from the bastion and took up either side of the floating island, guarding Stella like sentinels. I'm not being an overprotective dad, am I? Ashlock pondered but actually started thinking he hadn't done enough and should put up even more protection. One more Ent should do it. I have my void tendrils with consuming abyss, so is there a need for cows? But she is my best trump card, and Stella does have Maple at her side. Eventually, he let out a long sigh and decided to send Zeus. Larry would struggle to be in a spatial chi realm for a month straight as he would need to burn his cultivation to stay there, and cows was far too valuable for him to use as a mere guard, especially with Maple here. If Nox returns, cows will be my best way to kill her, so best to keep her at my side, Ashlock concluded. Zeus came through a portal under Ashlock's command, and after being given the same instructions as the other two, the Ent, which looked like a marble statue, took up guard on the northern side of the island. A lazy storm system gathered overhead as if waiting on standby to be unleashed at a moment's notice. Okay, now I feel better, Ashlock chuckled. What do you think, Willow? Will she be safe with this? Willow seemed jealous of his parenting antics toward Stella. Relax. We will return to Red Vine Peak together soon, and I will be stuck with just you for an entire week, Ashlock lamented. The two continued to talk as they orbited around the island and cultivated for many hours together. You know, Willow, I'm rather curious how much my cultivation will soar once my fractured soul reunites with my body. What do you think? Willow seemed sad at the mention of them separating. Don't feel sad. You remind me of my darn dog that I had to leave home every day before work. What's work? Don't worry about it. Ashlock found it rather amusing having someone to talk to all the time without feeling bad due to needing to use abyssal whispers, but it would be even better if Willow could speak. Now I know how Stella must have felt all those years with me being a mute. Ashlock laughed, although I must admit it has its endearing side to it, but certainly not ideal. After running out of topics to tell his offspring, Ashlock grew bored of mindlessly absorbing the ambient spatial chi like some type of sponge. It feels like a day has passed, and Stella is still diligently cultivating. Bringing up his system, Ashlock checked how much time he had till sundown in the real world. Time till sundown 1:05. Only an hour left outside, so around 4 hours in here. Not much point sticking around to absorb chi below my cultivation realm for such a short amount of time. Ashlock felt the itch of adventure back in his bark, so he summoned his menu and decided to visit Kaida. Ink Chi Realm. Description: Hatchery of the Midnight Inkwing. Chi level: Soul Fire 3rd stage. Environment: peaceful. Monsters: none. Current occupants, 1. He felt rather silly now surrounding Stella with his strongest guards when she was in a realm on the same level of danger as Kaida's, and he got nothing. But to be fair, after the events of the Azure Clan, he refused to trust any of these spatial pocket realms. Alright, Stella. I will see you in a week, Ashlock said to nobody but himself and Willow as he didn't want to disturb her. Time to go visit my favorite ink snake and see what shenanigans he is up to. After pressing the free button, reality warped again, and he reappeared above a literal black ocean that spread out in all directions until the gray horizon. The ink ocean was tranquil, without a wave in sight. Kaida has consumed the flesh of a divine being. Ashlock looked at the system message that appeared in his vision in total confusion. He's done what now? Ashlock glanced around in all directions but couldn't see Kaida anywhere. The only thing of note was a large shadow on the northern horizon, so Ashlock directed the bastion to begin moving at full speed in that direction. Time till sundown 0:19. After a few hours of flying, Ashlock found an island of gray rock that jutted out of the ink ocean. It resembled an iceberg with steep cliff faces. Weirdly, a waterfall of ink cascaded down the side of the island onto black ostrich-sized eggs that had been carefully placed by something into nooks and crevices. I think I found why this pocket realm is called the hatchery of the Midnight Inkwing. Ashlock grew concerned as he floated the bastion around the island, searching for Kaida. If there was a place where divine flesh could be lying around, it would be here unless there were other islands elsewhere. Ah, there you are, Ashlock almost missed Kaida due to the black scales that camouflaged him. The large snake looked like edamame as his body bulged due to what Ashlock assumed were multiple undigested eggs in his stomach. Hey, Kaida. Wake up. Ashlock shouted to the snake below, but Kaida seemed happily asleep, perhaps in a food coma. Well, shit, what should I do now? Ashlock didn't have much time left in the mystic realm, and although this pocket realm was apparently peaceful with no monsters, he didn't want to leave Kaida in such a vulnerable state right after consuming the eggs of a divine beast. I should take him back to Red Vine Peak just to be sure, but it would be a shame to stunt his cultivation by taking him away from all this ink, Ashlock pondered and then had an idea. Lowering the bastion into the ink ocean, Ashlock allowed the ink to flow over the stone ship's sides and create a small lake of chi-filled ink around Willow since there was a depression in the rock. Yes, I know it feels weird, just bear with it for now, Ashlock reassured Willow as the amethyst bastion core pulsed with power and the ship rose from the ocean with ink streaming down its side. Now, back above the gray island, Ashlock used telekinesis to carefully pick up Kaida and bring him aboard the ship. He then lowered Kaida into the ink lake with his head resting on the side as if he were at a spa. Now, should I take these eggs? Kaida has already eaten a few, so whoever these belong to will already be enraged. Ashlock weighed the pros and cons realistically. He doubted whoever laid these eggs would have a way to track them across dimensions, especially if he hid them in his inventory or something. I'll leave a few just to distract the mother. Ashlock used telekinesis to lift 8 eggs and placed them in the ink lake with Kaida while leaving a few behind. With everything secured on board and minutes remaining on Progeny Dominion, Ashlock split his focus and conjured a massive portal that led back to Red Vine Peak. Goodbye adventures, Ashlock sighed as he floated the bastion through the giant portal that manifested over the ink ocean. Back home already, Ashlock muttered as he looked at the setting sun over the distant mountains. Wasting no time, he maneuvered the bastion to hover on the east side of the wilderness near his spatial affinity trees so it would be out of direct sight from both Darklight City and the Whitestone Palace. A moment later, Ashlock felt his fractured soul that had been floating within Willow's star core forcefully return through the ethereal roots and merge back with his soul. A rush of power overcame him, and he didn't even notice the system message informing him that his link to the bastion had ceased as his cultivation soared. The euphoria lasted a while, and once it faded, Ashlock hastily opened his system menu. Demonic Demi-Divine Tree, Age, 9. Star Core, 7 Stage. Soul Type, Amethyst, Spatial. Wow, I went up 2 entire stages at once. Ashlock knew he had been somewhat close to ascending to the 6th stage, but the chi he absorbed in the mystic realm had pushed him over the edge and then up another stage. Not too far from the nascent soul realm now. 1 or 2 more mystic realm visits should do it. Feeling the cold of night settling on his leaves, Ashlock was relieved to see the bastion quietly float a few meters from the mountain peak on the east side. Willow, can you hear me? Ashlock asked, and he felt a feeling of agreement through their ethereal link. Can you move the bastion backward by a meter? Ashlock felt a wave of spatial chi far below his as his star core offspring lit up with spatial flames like a beacon. The bastion then slowly drifted backward a meter and then stopped. Okay, Willow can still control the bastion without a fractured part of my soul, but I didn't feel any pull on my star core, so did the chi to power the bastion's core come from Willow? Ashlock wondered but was feeling too tired to experiment with the bastion right now. Larry, guard Kaida in the ink pool while he sleeps, Ashlock said with a yawn as he allowed sleep to overcome him. It had been a long day. The following morning, Ashlock awoke to the chirps of birds. It was nice to feel the solid ground around his roots and be completely still apart from the rustling of his leaves in the wind. Flying around is fun, but this mountain peak is my home. Ashlock relished in the beautiful morning, but he was interrupted by a visitor. It was Kaida who slowly slithered across the mountain. The bulge in his stomach was gone, meaning those eggs containing some divine beast's unhatched children had been consumed. Briefly checking on the bastion that was still floating, he saw the eggs were still there. A small cry brought Ashlock's attention back to his trunk, and he saw Kaida had rammed his head into his trunk. Kaida has accumulated enough chi to evolve to be great. New evolution options have been added due to consumption of divine flesh. Ebb and Flow Serpent Sovereign Kaida wishes to evolve. Chapter 209, Ink Snake Evolution. This was an evolution Ashlock had been eagerly anticipating, and the fact that Kaida had consumed the flesh of a divine beast's unborn children made him excited to see how it would affect the evolution options. Yes, I want him to evolve, Ashlock said to the system prompt, and as usual, multiple options popped up. However, weirdly, the first option was glowing compared to the other two. Midnight Ink Lindworm Plus. As a lesser evolution of the Midnight Inkwing, Kaida would inherit the blood of a divine being from the upper layers of creation, granting him unlimited cultivation potential. Midnight Ink Lindworms have snake-like bodies made entirely from divine ink. Their bodies are also covered in black scales of hardened ink that they can use as a medium to affect the world, such as creating talismans or runic arrays out of their scales. They also can infuse their will through their divine ink to create contracts overseen by the heavens. Also, due to the connection with the divine, Midnight Ink Lindworms can gain heavenly insight from words written in ink. Well, that's certainly something. Ashlock was taken aback and read through the description again. The name and the question marks, alongside the divine nature of the evolution's explanation, clued Ashlock into why it was glowing. This was a divine option brought on by the unique circumstances surrounding Kaida's evolution. That being his consumption of the Midnight Inkwing's divine flesh. Unlimited cultivation potential alone would have sold me, but his body being turned into divine ink and being able to create heaven-binding contracts. Are those like oaths but in writing? Ashlock could see a lot of use for that as the sect grew, as getting everyone to make a soul-binding oath with him seemed a little tedious. But if they could mass-produce contracts overseen by the heavens, that opened up a lot of options. Kaida, I am so sorry, but you might become the Ashfolin sect's first civil servant. Ashlock laughed. Something about a divine serpent handling paperwork is amusing. That aside, Ashlock could finally see some fighting potential showing through with this evolution, and he hoped that evolving to the B grade would solve Kaida's most considerable issue, which was his lack of ink chi to use due to how hard it was to cultivate. If Kaida reaches the equivalent of a star core cultivator, he should be able to start generating chi passively. Ashlock pondered. Larry was a little weaker than a star core cultivator when he was at B grade. So, I hope Kaida will be stronger than Larry, as Kaida will have a divine race. Whereas Larry only became overlord of the Ashen Spiders and showed the power of a peak star core cultivator when he reached a grade. Besides having more chi to work with, Ashlock also saw new fighting styles with this evolution. Back when Kaida pranked Stella, it took him 5 minutes to write the runic words for explosion in ink from his tail. The writing alone took time and precious chi from Kaida. Then he had to manually tap the runic words to activate the ink once Stella was close enough and leaning over for it to explode in her face. Ashlock mused as he recollected the last time they had tested the snake's powers. The explosion wasn't even that strong and only enough to make Stella stumble back in confusion. Ashlock had concluded back then that Kaida had a lot of future potential, but as he was right now, his affinity being so rare and powerful was a massive handicap. So Ashlock left the snake alone and did not ask Kaida to do anything except that one time Kaida gave Stella a tattoo to help with her Rosalind persona. Looking back at the evolution description, the line that reads scales of hardened ink that they can use as a medium to affect the world, such as creating talismans or runic arrays out of their scales, suggested to him that Kaida would be able to create arrays or write out runic words on his own scales and then hurl them at enemies or place them below their feet without having to spend 5 minutes setting something up beforehand and then also be present to actually activate them. So this evolution also gives Kaida a new way to fight on top of the heaven-bound contracts, turning his flesh and bones into divine ink, giving him unlimited cultivation potential and being a lesser version of a divine beast. Ashlock concluded. It was pretty obvious he would pick this glowing option at the top, but he still checked the others out to see what Kaida would have been presented if not for the mischievous noodle finding some unfreed eggs to eat. Abyssal Ink Shade Worm. As an Abyssal Ink Shade Worm, Kaida's ink and water manipulation abilities become even more profound. His scales take on an iridescent sheen that reflects his environment, making him nearly invisible when he wishes. His golden eyes now not only gleam with authority but can see through illusions and darkness. If not for the other evolution giving Kaida a way to imbue his scales with his ink, this stealth-based option has some merit as he could sneak around the battlefield setting up traps and such, Ashlock mused. But stealth and seeing through illusions isn't very useful if the opponent is much stronger and can shrug off any traps Kaida lays. The Black Basilisk Emperor. Taking on traits of the fearsome basilisk, Kaida's gaze can paralyze or control adversaries, and his ink will now possess corrosive or transformative qualities, turning whatever it touches into black stone or more ink to serve his will. Okay, if I needed to optimize Kaida for pure combat like Larry was, then this would be a great pick. Ashlock had plenty of people who were good at fighting around him now, so someone more specialized at arrays or these new contracts was more beneficial than another bodyguard. Ashlock knew how useful a gaze that stunned opponents was due to his own demonic eye that had caught many people off guard and allowed him to win fights far above his station in the past. The corrosive ink also sounds like the digestive fluids my black vines secrete, which would also be useful. Ashlock would have been rather fine with picking this option for Kaida if not for the superior divine option. Without much more debating needed, Ashlock picked the glowing option that spoke of all the things he wished for Kaida. System: I choose Midnight Ink Lindworm. Evolution path: Midnight Ink Lindworm chosen, evolution initiating. Kaida reeled back with a hiss as a stream of ink traveled through the air from the lake of ink on the bastion nearby and began to form around the snake like a bubble. This ink bubble began to harden until it took on an egg shape, much like the eggs Ashlock had stolen from the hatchery of the Midnight Inkwing. Are you okay, Kaida? Ashlock asked but received no reply. The giant egg that was easily 5 meters tall stayed leaning against his trunk. Since the egg had drawn in nearby ink during the evolution, Ashlock decided to float the giant egg back to the bastion and place it carefully in the lake alongside the other eggs. I think I see why those eggs were placed on an island surrounded by an ocean of ink chi, Ashlock mused as he saw Kaida's egg greedily begin to drain the ink. Seeing the ink slowly vanishing gave Ashlock an idea. He didn't have access to any flowers that produced ink chi, so he wouldn't be able to make a cultivation grove for Kaida unless he grew a tree within that ink, so it took on ink affinity. It was annoying he had to go about it in such a roundabout way that cost credits, but all his current offspring had formed their soul cores and chosen an affinity already. It's fine. I can use the Skyborn Bastion skill to force the tree up to the star core realm within minutes. Ashlock removed one of the poisonous fruits containing a demonic seed from his branch and floated it with telekinesis. Then his vision shifted out into the wilderness, where there was a wall of demonic trees, and he saw a small gathering of Chi realm demonic chickens being chased down by what could only be described as a purple-skinned boar covered in pus and warts. Its eyes were red with rage, and its mouth gaped open, showing off its rotten teeth. You will do nicely. Ashlock willed a portal into existence overhead and sent the apple-sized fruit containing his seed shooting through. The boar was so focused on trying to eat the chickens with its mouth hanging wide open that it failed to notice the flying fruit, which whistled through the air and then shot down its throat, causing it to faceplant the ground and start retching. Screeching happily at the boar's misfortune, the chickens ran off, and Ashlock couldn't be bothered to waste the chi to hunt them down as they would be worth at most a credit each. The boar seemed to be struggling, and after only a few minutes, its eyes rolled back and it fell to its side while frothing at the mouth. Did it die from poison that quickly? Ashlock didn't remember his poison being that effective, especially on such a large monster. Was the poison derived from his C-grade poison resistance stronger than he remembered? Lifting the now dead boar up with telekinesis, Ashlock brought it back to Red Vine Peak through the portal and dumped it into the ink lake on the bastion as far as he could from Kaida's egg. Okay, that seed should sprout into a tree soon. While waiting, Ashlock summoned his sign-in system. Idolatry daily sign-in system. Day, 3553. Daily credit, 1. Sacrifice credit, 2303. Sign in. Considering I was only in the Mystic Realm for 4 days, I got quite the boon. Now, what should I spend these credits on? Ashlock had already reserved at least 1,000 for a second bastion, likely of the ink affinity to give Kaida a place to cultivate further and call home. I suppose I should keep the rest lying around to power my skills, especially since credits will become harder to get now. Having ascended to the 7th stage of the Star Core realm, there wasn't much around him to consume that was strong enough to reap many credits other than Nox, the Grand Elders of the Blood Lotus sect's noble families, and maybe whatever monster or thing was causing the disturbance out in the wilderness that Elder Brent encountered. It does raise some questions regarding my system's motivation, though. Ashlock mulled as he looked at his status screen with all his skills. If the system wished for me to grow as quickly as possible, why wouldn't it give me the same number of credits no matter how strong I was? It's not like my new A- grade skills are any stronger than the ones I had got when I had been a Chi Realm tree. So, if the system had its own agenda, what could it be? Did it even have a purpose? Was he simply just lucky for it to have picked him as its host? Did others have systems, or was it just him? If I am the only one in the whole universe with a system, then there has to be a reason behind it. Ashlock refused to believe in simple fate. He knew the world was vast. Senior Lee had opened his eyes to this fact long ago, but perhaps his worldview had been shaken even more after encountering the Azure Clan from an upper layer. It was a rather weird thought to know some people were so above you there was a literal void separating you. You know, it might just be a coincidence, but doesn't Kain Azircrest have an awfully similar sounding noble family name to the Azure Clan? Ashlock pondered as he shifted his view to the White Stone Palace. Basked in the morning light, Ashlock took a moment to admire Douglas's handiwork in making the White Stone peak into what it was today. The White Stone Palace, which lorded over the entire peak, was abuzz with activity as red clothes moved between the palace and the many pavilions built on the northern side. He also saw a few red clothes heading down the mountain ridge path toward the many groves of fire affinity demonic trees covered in blaze serpent roses. Glad to see the red clothes are doing fine without their elders around. Ashlock stayed in the sky for a moment, watching everything from above. Back on topic, the Azircrest family specializes in wind affinity and making airships, whereas the Azure Clan seemed to focus on spatial. But what is the difference between a family and a clan? Do clans function more like a sect but are more tight-knit like some sort of ninja clan family thing? If that was the case, it was still possible the Azure Clan had some cultivators practicing other affinities, such as wind, which made the connection between the Azure Clan and the Azircrest family more likely. When everyone returns from the Mystic Realm, I should send someone to ask Kain Azircrest about it. Ashlock decided and then returned to his own mountain peak. Ah, we have signs of life. Ashlock was relieved to see his seed still functioned like it did in the past as a small shoot with a single red leaf poked through the boar's disgusting puss-covered skin. He hadn't been spreading his seeds around with everything going on recently, but with a way to boost any tree he wanted to Star Core, the same realm as him, for only 1,000 credits, the value of his offspring had increased tremendously. I guess I can spread my seed around while I wait for everyone to get back. Ashlock pondered but decided he needed to do something with the bastion first. That tree is going to take a few days at least to consume that body and grow, and Kaida's evolution will also take a bit. The celestial fog in the Mystic Realm has time dilation, right? Although Willow should be able to pick a pocket realm and enter it, there was no way for Willow to know which one Stella was in without Ashlock's soul fragment being there and using dimensional overlap. Willow, float the bastion into the Mystic Realm fog, and don't try to enter any of the pocket realms. Just float there in the outskirts of the fog for the 4 times time dilation and let me know when Kaida hatches. After a wave of acceptance of his order, Willow became aflame with soul fire and the bastion slowly floated upward and then over toward the Mystic Realm. The bastion was actually large enough to cast a large shadow over the fog, and it was strange to watch the ship disappear into the fog despite the fog only appearing a few meters high. Ashlock was left alone on his mountain peak with the bastion gone. Only the chirps of birds and the rustling of leaves accompanied his thoughts. It's kinda lonely, Ashlock murmured as he saw Larry sleeping in one of the demonic trees and Chaos standing perfectly still while charging up through a black root. With nothing much to do as he was in defensive mode until everyone got back, he turned to the stack of books Stella had robbed from the Azure Clan library. The fact she stole a stack of books under the nose of a Monarch Realm Elder is still wild to me. What a crazy girl. Ashlock chuckled as he floated them up with telekinesis. I kinda want to study something other than spatial lock as it's hard to practice without anyone around, so I suppose I'll read up on one of these other techniques. But which one should I pick though? After some debate, he decided an offensive skill would be the best to learn, considering this system's aversion to giving him ways to fight, and seemed to prefer powering up his allies. So it's between Spatial Blades and Warp Strike. Ashlock gave a skim read of the two books by flipping the pages with telekinesis. Alright, it seems Warp Strike is a technique that allows me to infuse spatial energy into weapons, allowing them to hit from unexpected angles or bypass defenses by momentarily warping space. Whereas Spatial Blades is a more independent technique that lets me weaponize my chi by creating sharp rifts in space which can slice directly through people and even mountains. Both seemed good and also easier to learn than Spatial Lock. The thing that jumped out to him the most was the fact Warp Strike was able to bypass defenses by warping space. If I can get it to a level that I can bypass Nox's shadow armor, then I would be able to skewer her with multiple swords while she is stunned by soul or something. Deciding out of the two that Warp Strike seemed the most interesting as it also furthered his training to become the greatest tree swordsman in all the 9 realms, he put the other book to the side and started gingerly reading its contents. Before he knew it, 2 days had passed where he did nothing but spread his seeds in the wilderness through portals, read the technique manual, sleep, and meditate on the deep insights gained from a clan on a higher layer of creation. However, Ashlock was eventually broken from his meandering thoughts when Willow reached out to him through their ethereal root connection. Kaida had finished his evolution, and the ink tree had grown. Oh. That's great news. Ashlock was super excited to see the changed appearance of his favorite ink snake and what his new powers looked like in reality. Chapter 210, Heavenly Inside. The bastion emerged from the mystic realm and blocked out the midday sun, casting Red Vine Peak in a looming shadow. Purple flames rippled across the jagged black rock that made up the ship's hull while Willow blazed with soul flames as if he were a chimney atop the behemoth that was as long as Ashlock was tall. Something poked its head over the side of the bastion and gazed at Ashlock with liquid gold eyes. The black scales and mischievous grin were enough to key Ashlock in on who this new face might be. "Is that you, Kaida?" Ashlock asked the creature, and it nodded. "You certainly look more handsome. Grown up." Kaida tilted his head at him in confusion at his compliments and flickered his pink tongue while hissing softly but then shrunk back into the ink lake and out of view. Chuckling to himself at the ink snake's antics, Ashlock told Willow to park the bastion where he had been a day before. The bastion slowly drifted over to the eastern side of the mountain, which faced out to the farmland occupied by villages of mortals, the wall that still had a large hole due to Nox's escape, and then the endless wilderness that spread out to the horizon. Ashlock noted that there was now a second tree on the bastion that was growing out of the ink lake and was around a meter high. There was no sign of the boar's corpse, so the baby demonic tree had likely consumed it all to fuel its rapid growth. "Kaida, stop hiding in the ink and come over here," Ashlock called out once the bastion floated parallel to the mountain peak. The ink lake rippled as a head poked out. Kaida's head had grown in size and taken on a more dragon-like appearance with a more square jaw compared to the roundness of a snake, and he also had black fins from his forehead that ran down the rest of his neck and body. His body was still snake-like, apart from 2 muscular arms protruding a meter down his body from his head, which he was using to grip the side of the ink lake and haul himself out. Letting out a yawn, Kaida slothfully made his way over to Ashlock by pulling himself along with his new arms, which ended in claws while the rest of his body lazily trailed behind like a meandering river. It looked like Kaida was coated in a fresh sheen of ink that glistened in the sunlight. Ashlock expected him to leave a trail like a snail as he came over, but that wasn't the case. The evolution description did say Kaida's body would become one made entirely out of divine ink where even his scales are just hardened ink, so it makes sense that he doesn't smear his body on the ground as he moves. Ashlock mused as Kaida stopped before his trunk and looked up at his canopy with curious golden eyes and then glanced to the side at the floating book Ashlock had been reading. If Ashlock had to guess, Kaida was now around 10 meters long and far thicker than before. His scales were also layered like a tiled roof or armored plates rather than as intricately connected as snake scales. Kaida coiled upwards and arced his body to reach for the book. Ashlock released his telekinetic hold on the book, allowing Kaida to grab it between his claws and inspect the words. Kaida studied the book for a while, and after reading a few pages, he tilted his head to the side as if confused. Kaida, can you read it? Ashlock asked. Granted, the book wasn't written in the ancient language, but he assumed he would still be able to read it due to Ashlock's language of the world skill that Larry seemed to also have. Kaida nodded. Judging by the fact that Kaida wasn't speaking, it seemed speech was something a summon became capable of at a grade. What's the problem then? Ashlock asked. Kaida stayed holding the book in one claw while ink gathered in the palm of his other. This ball of ink then consolidated into a black scale like the ones covering his body while he carved a single runic word with his thumb. Confused. The book's contents confuse you? Ashlock asked, and Kaida nodded. Okay, they were getting somewhere. Kaida could read. He was just struggling to understand the concepts outlined in the Azure Clan's Warp Strike Technique manual, which made sense since it was confusing even to Ashlock despite the fact he had spent days pondering how it would work. Kaida also hadn't read anything before, and Ashlock wasn't sure what Kaida's level of intellect was. Previously, he had shown somewhat childlike innocence, especially around Diana, whom he seemed drawn to somehow. Say Kaida, forget the book for now. Your evolution should allow you to make arrays and talismans from those ink scales. Why don't you try making a few? Ashlock suggested this to see what Kaida would come up with and where his capabilities lay. Ink chi didn't seem very defined other than its ability to manifest things into reality, and he wanted to see how far that went now that Kaida had evolved. Kaida placed the book on the floor, the black scale in his other palm rippled, and the word confused in the ancient runic language disappeared from its surface. Kaida then stared off into space and seemed lost on what to do. You made one that made a simple explosion before, Ashlock suggested. Start with that, and then we can build up from there. Kaida nodded and looked down at the scale. Scratching with his claw, he wrote out the runic word for explosion. Nothing happened until Kaida inserted some more chi into the scale, causing the carved-out word in the black scale to glow with heavenly light and promptly explode in his face, consuming all the ink and making Kaida recoil a little in surprise. Ashlock suppressed a chuckle as Kaida had done the same thing to Stella a while ago and laughed at her for it but had now done the same thing accidentally to himself. Kaida recovered a moment later and hissed angrily at his paw where the ink scale had been. There was also a notable scale missing from his neck area, exposing the ink-like skin below. However, there was a hardened ink scale slowly reformed from the top. Are you able to generate ink chi by yourself? Ashlock asked Kaida. If so, that meant Kaida was in the Star Core realm, and they didn't have to worry as much when practicing these techniques. Kaida nodded as he curved his head to look at the missing scale that was slowly regenerating as he must have felt the harsh mountain wind on his exposed skin. It was almost like watching an ink waterfall in ultra-slow motion as it reformed. Okay, let's try that again. Write out explosion, but turn it into an array by adding something else like a condition or timer so it doesn't explode in your face again. Kaida nodded slowly and then got to work on it. Or he should have, but he seemed lost. Either Kaida lacked imagination or simply didn't have a vast enough worldview or experiences to draw upon for inspiration. Don't worry if you can't think of something. Let's work it out together. Ashlock sighed as Kaida looked at him with pleading eyes and started hissing. Concentrate, okay. Write in a circle 3 seconds, and then in the middle of the circle, write the runic words for explode. The actual layout and what you write aren't super important. I suspect your intent when creating the array will matter far more, as that scale is crafted out of your own divine ink, which should have a deep connection with heaven. Kaida looked back at the scale in his hand with interest. So write out what I suggested, and in your mind, picture the scale exploding after you have had time to throw it. Kaida got to work while hissing happily. It took far longer than the first time, and he seemed to be concentrating intensely while carefully crafting out the words into the scale. After around 5 minutes, he seemed to have finished. Good. Now activate it and throw it up in the air away from both of us. Ashlock instructed. Kaida did as told. He inserted some more chi into the scale, and the circle of runic words reading 3 seconds lit up with a heavenly gold hue. Unlike last time, it didn't immediately explode. Kaida threw it up into the air, and a moment later, the words explode in the middle lit up, and a tremendous explosion went off. Ashlock felt the force hit his trunk to little effect, his branches groaned, and some of his leaves were blown off. Kaida was thrown a meter or so onto his back and was left gazing up at the sky. Flocks of birds all around took to the sky in a cry of panic due to the sudden boom alongside his leaves that drifted along with the howling mountain winds. Well, that was a bit more powerful than last time, Ashlock said to Kaida after everything had settled. Kaida groaned in return as he rolled onto his belly, heaved himself up with his arms, and shook his head as if dazed. What did you do differently? Was it the amount of focus you put in? Or did you insert more chi than last time? Kaida used the tip of his claw to quickly scratch into the mountain stone. Both. I see. How interesting. Ashlock mused. So the amount of detail or thought that goes into creating the array and, more obviously, the amount of chi you insert into the scale to activate it dictates how devastating the effect is. It was sort of the same for him. The more chi he put into his techniques naturally increased their power. Still, unlike Kaida, who just had to convey his intent when carving out the runes, Ashlock had to spend hours or days meditating and conversing with heaven to develop a technique they both understood. Wait, does that mean if he can better convey his intent, the explosion would be stronger? Ashlock did recall that the system notification regarding Kaida's evolution mentioned something about gaining heavenly insight from words written in ink. Ink chi should let him use any element he wants so long as he understands it and can put intent behind the words carved into his ink. Ashlock used telekinesis and picked up the technique manual about spatial blades since warp strike required a weapon, and although Kaida could probably make a sword out of ink and wield it if he so pleased, that was for another time. Before giving him the book, Ashlock wanted to test something. Kaida, imagine trying to carve through reality with your claws. Go on, raise them, and pretend. Tilting his head as if Ashlock were crazy, Kaida raised his claw and slashed down, creating a whistling noise. Good. Now imagine you can do that at range. Sending your claws through space to cleave through someone or maybe even a wall. Ashlock tried to help him picture the technique. Kaida slashed his claw down a few more times while glaring at one of the demonic trees in the distance. Funnily enough, Ashlock felt a wave of concern through the root network from that offspring, so he had to reassure it that everything should be fine. Okay, good, now try to write spatial blades in the ancient runic language on an ink scale while imagining what I just told you. Kaida closed his eyes and slowly carved the words. Ashlock watched in anticipation. A simple explosion could be seen as fire chi, but you could have explosions of just air or water if they were heated in a closed container. But spatial blades was most certainly a technique that relied on knowledge of reality that Kaida shouldn't have. So, how far would some simple teachings from him go toward Kaida making a talisman of ink that produced the intended effect? Finished with his work, Kaida looked to him for guidance. Ashlock found it rather cute how Kaida kept looking at him for advice, and he wondered how much he would pester Diana for help once she returned. Alright, now aim it at the sky and activate it, Ashlock instructed. Kaida eyed the scale in his hand with some understandable nerves as he aimed it at the sky. He inserted his chi, causing it to flash with heavenly golden light before the ink condensed into a single point. From this singularity, an invisible blade was born, and it ripped a small tear through space before dissipating. It was weak. That attack could have maybe killed some Soul Fire Realm chickens, assuming Kaida could even aim at them. But that wasn't important. The attack proved that Kaida could manipulate and slice reality despite not cultivating spatial affinity. I wonder if ink chi works through Daos. Just like Stella with lightning. Stella can't cultivate and improve her body and soul with lightning chi, but she can still wield it, albeit at an amateur level compared to someone with a lightning affinity, as she doesn't know any techniques to harness its true power. If that were true, so long as Kaida improved his comprehension of various Daos, his ability to use techniques through his ink chi would improve. Now, let's see if he can really acquire heavenly insight from words written in ink. Ashlock mused as he floated the spatial blades technique manual before Kaida, who was looking at the 3 missing scales on his neck with concern. Don't worry about those. You can cultivate the scales back quickly in the mystic realm after this next experiment, Ashlock said as he laid the open book before Kaida. Now read this with intent. Use your heaven-granted abilities to try and discern the meaning hidden within the ink. Kaida stooped his head low to inspect the pages. He flipped them carefully with his claws a few times but didn't seem to understand the content. It wasn't until he placed his paw on the book out of frustration and inserted some chi that something happened. The ink on the page glowed and rose off the page. Kaida blinked at the floating words in awe as they drifted into his mind. Kaida closed his eyes for a long time, so long, in fact, the sun was about to set when he finally awoke from his dazed state. Oh, you're awake. Ashlock put down the warp strike book he had been reading for a few hours. So, up for trying again with some new insight. Kaida didn't even need Ashlock's encouragement as he was already summoning a new ink scale to his palm. Even though half a day had passed, the first missing scale on his neck wasn't anywhere near to being reformed. This didn't bother Kaida as he summoned his fourth one for the day and began etching in the word Spatial blade. Hold on, don't fire that here. Ashlock summoned a portal that led to the wilderness. Fire it through here. Kaida slithered over. He squinted through the wobbling portal, then at his carefully crafted ink scale he had spent half an hour on. After some back and forth, he slowly put his arm through the wobbling portal while clutching the scale as if it were the most precious thing in the world. To Ashlock's relief, the portal didn't do anything to affect the ink scale. Okay, go for it. Kaida nodded, and chi surged down his arm. The second the ink scale collapsed into a singularity, he reeled his hand back as if scared it would consume his hand. What followed was reality being ripped apart by 5 invisible blades of immense power that cleaved through space, leaving scars in the air as they traveled and then impacted the lush meadow below, leaving deep fissures in the earth as if some godly dinosaur had gone to town on the land. If the previous attack Kaida had performed couldn't kill a chicken, this one could wipe out a town, and Ashlock was darn impressed.